The illusion of linear time. Time flows forward, or so we believe. Every tick of the clock, every sunrise and sunset, reinforces our perception that we move through moments in an orderly sequence from past to future. Yet this fundamental assumption about reality may be nothing more than an elaborate illusion crafted by our limited human consciousness. Consider the nature of your experience right now. You perceive this moment as the present, a fleeting instant sandwiched between memories of the past and anticipations of the future. But what defines this present moment? How long does it last? When you try to grasp it, to pin down its exact duration, it slips away like water through your fingers. Philosophers have wrestled with this puzzle for millennia. Augustine of Hippo observed that the past no longer exists, the future has not yet come to be, and the present has no duration. If the present is merely a boundary between non-existent past and non-existent future, then when exactly do we live? This paradox suggests that our everyday experience of temporal flow might be fundamentally mistaken. Modern physics adds another layer to this mystery. Einstein's theory of relativity reveals that time is not the universal constant we imagined. Instead, it stretches and contracts depending on gravity and velocity. What you experience as simultaneous, an observer moving at high speed might experience as sequential. Events that seem to unfold in one order from your perspective might occur in reverse order from another frame of reference. This relativity of time challenges our intuitive notion of a universal now. There is no cosmic present moment that applies everywhere in the universe simultaneously. The idea of events happening at the same time across vast distances becomes meaningless. Time, rather than being a flowing river carrying us all forward together, reveals itself as something far stranger and more complex. Perhaps most unsettling is the block universe theory, which suggests that all moments in time exist equally. Past, present, and future are merely different regions of a four-dimensional space-time continuum. From this perspective, your birth, this moment of listening, and your eventual death all exist simultaneously in the eternal structure of reality. The flow of time becomes not a feature of the universe itself, but merely a subjective experience of consciousness moving through static dimensions. Your memory creates the illusion of temporal progression. Each remembered moment feels like it happened before this one, creating a narrative sequence that seems to prove time's forward motion. But memory itself exists only in the present moment. You never actually experience the past directly, only present memories of what you believe happened before. Similarly, you never experience the future, only present anticipations and predictions. This raises profound questions about personal identity. If all moments exist equally in the block universe, which version of you is the real you? Are you the person who existed 5 years ago, the one experiencing this moment, or the one who will exist tomorrow? Perhaps the question itself is meaningless, based on false assumptions about the nature of temporal existence. The psychological arrow of time emerges from the accumulation of memories and the anticipation of events yet to come. Your consciousness creates temporal direction by organizing experiences into before and after relationships. Without memory, without the ability to compare present sensations to past ones, the flow of time might cease to exist entirely. As you drift toward sleep, consider how this reframes your existence. Every moment you have ever lived continues to exist somewhere in the vast architecture of space-time. Time's arrow may be nothing more than the particular path your awareness takes through an already completed eternal tapestry of being. Zeno's paradoxes and infinite division. In ancient Greece, a philosopher named Zeno of Elea proposed a series of paradoxes that challenged the very nature of motion and infinity. His most famous thought experiment involved Achilles, the swift-footed hero, racing against a tortoise. Despite Achilles being much faster, Zeno argued that he could never overtake the slow-moving tortoise if it had even the smallest head start. The logic seems flawless at first glance. Before Achilles can pass the tortoise, he must first reach the point where the tortoise started. But by the time he arrives there, the tortoise has moved slightly forward to a new position. Achilles must then reach this new position, but again the tortoise has advanced a little further. This process continues infinitely, creating an endless series of smaller and smaller distances that Achilles must cover. Zeno's insight was that any finite distance contains an infinite number of points. To traverse from one location to another, you must pass through every point along the way. Since there are infinitely many points, and it takes some amount of time to pass each one, the journey should require infinite time. Yet we observe motion happening constantly around us. This paradox reveals a fundamental tension between our mathematical understanding of infinity and our direct experience of reality. The arrow paradox presents another fascinating challenge to our assumptions about time and motion. Zeno argued that at any single instant, an arrow in flight occupies a specific position in space. At that instant, it is neither moving to where it is, nor to where it is not. If the arrow is not moving at any given instant, how can it ever be said to move at all? Motion appears to vanish when we examine it closely enough. These paradoxes illuminate the strange relationship between the continuous and the discrete, between the infinitely divisible and the indivisible moment. They suggest that our common sense understanding of motion and time might be fundamentally flawed. Perhaps movement is not what it appears to be. Perhaps the smooth flow of time is actually composed of discrete, indivisible units that create an illusion of continuity. Modern mathematics resolves these paradoxes through the concept of limits and convergent infinite series. The infinite sequence of distances that Achilles must cover forms a mathematical series that converges to a finite sum. While there are indeed infinitely many steps, their total duration is finite. This resolution relies on sophisticated mathematical concepts that were unavailable to ancient Greek thinkers. However, the philosophical implications remain profound. Zeno's paradoxes reveal that infinity lurks within every finite interval of space and time. Between any two moments, no matter how close together, lie infinitely many other moments. This infinite divisibility suggests that the present moment, which seems so solid and real, might be nothing more than a mathematical abstraction with no actual duration. The paradoxes also raise questions about the fundamental nature of space and time themselves. Are they truly continuous, infinitely divisible quantities as mathematics suggests? Or might they be composed of discrete, indivisible units at the smallest scales? Modern physics explores these possibilities through theories of quantum spacetime and Planck scale phenomena. The dichotomy paradox adds another layer to these mysteries. Before you can travel any distance, you must first travel half that distance. But before you can travel half the distance, you must travel a quarter of it. This division continues infinitely, suggesting that you can never begin moving at all. Yet, motion clearly occurs, indicating that our logical analysis of space and time encounters fundamental limitations. As you contemplate these ancient puzzles, consider how they apply to your own experience of time passing. Each second contains infinite subdivisions, infinite moments that your consciousness somehow navigates effortlessly. The journey from wakefulness to sleep involves traversing infinitely many states of awareness. Yet you complete this passage every night. The present moment's true duration. What is the length of now? This seemingly simple question opens a chasm of philosophical complexity that has puzzled thinkers for centuries. We experience the present moment as a tangible reality, the only time that truly exists. Yet when we attempt to measure its duration, it proves as elusive as catching smoke with our bare hands. William James, the pioneering psychologist, introduced the concept of the specious present to describe our actual experience of the now. Unlike the mathematical instant, which has zero duration, our psychological present stretches across several seconds. When you hear a melody, you do not experience individual notes in isolation. Instead, you perceive a flowing sequence where past notes linger in consciousness while future notes are anticipated. This creates a thick present moment that contains both memory and expectation. Neuroscience reveals that our brain constructs the present moment through complex integration processes. Visual information takes different amounts of time to process depending on its complexity. The brain must synchronize these varied processing speeds to create the illusion of simultaneous perception. What you experience as the present moment is actually a carefully orchestrated reconstruction of events that occurred at slightly different times. The binding problem in neuroscience illustrates this challenge further. Different aspects of perception, such as color, motion, and form, are processed in separate brain regions. Yet you experience a unified present moment where all these elements appear to occur together. This unity requires the brain to solve an extraordinary timing problem, binding together neural events that happen across different time frames into a single coherent experience. Consider the act of speaking a sentence. By the time you reach the end of a sentence, the beginning has already faded into memory. Yet you maintain awareness of the entire sentence as a unified thought existing in the present. This suggests that the present moment has a temporal thickness that allows it to contain sequential information as a simultaneous whole. Buddhist philosophy offers another perspective on the present moment through the concept of mindfulness. In meditation practices, practitioners attempt to narrow their attention to the immediate now, observing thoughts and sensations as they arise and pass away. This practice reveals how rarely we actually inhabit the present moment. Most of our waking consciousness dwells in memories of the past or projections into the future. The attempt to grasp the pure present moment leads to a paradox. The very act of observing the present transforms it into memory. By the time you recognize that you are experiencing the now, that moment has already slipped into the past. Consciousness seems to lag slightly behind experience, always arriving just too late to catch the present moment in its pure form.
Physics adds another layer to this mystery through the relativity of simultaneity. What counts as the present moment depends on your frame of reference. Events that appear simultaneous to you might occur in different sequences for an observer moving at high velocity. This suggests that the present moment is not a universal feature of reality, but rather a local phenomenon tied to specific perspectives. Perhaps the present moment is best understood not as a duration, but as a process, a continuous becoming rather than a static being. Each instant of consciousness emerges from the complex interaction between memory, perception, and anticipation. The now becomes not a thing we can grasp, but a flowing process we participate in, a dynamic interface between what has been and what might be. As you settle into rest, notice how your awareness of the present moment shifts and changes, becoming more fluid and dreamlike until the boundaries between past, present, and future begin to dissolve entirely into the timeless realm of approaching sleep.
Memory as time travel. Memory transforms you into a time traveler, capable of journeying to moments that technically no longer exist. Each time you recall a childhood birthday, your first day at school, or yesterday's conversation, you accomplish something that should be impossible according to the linear progression of time. You visit the past without leaving the present, experiencing events that have already dissolved into the fabric of history. But what exactly are you accessing when you remember? Neuroscience reveals that memory is not a perfect recording device, but rather a creative reconstruction process. Each time you recall an event, your brain rebuilds it from scattered neural fragments, influenced by your current emotional state, recent experiences, and unconscious biases. The past you visit through memory is not the past as it actually occurred, but a newly constructed version shaped by the present moment. This reconstructive nature of memory raises profound questions about the relationship between time and consciousness. If the past exists only as present neural activity, then memory creates a strange temporal paradox. The past influences the present through memory, but memory exists only in the present. You carry traces of temporal experiences that no longer exist, yet these traces shape your current reality more powerfully than immediate sensations. Consider the phenomenon of childhood memories that feel more vivid than yesterday's events. These early recollections often possess an emotional intensity that recent experiences lack. This suggests that memory operates according to principles of significance rather than temporal proximity. The most psychologically important moments become the most accessible, regardless of when they occurred. Time's chronological order yields to the emotional logic of personal meaning. False memories demonstrate memory's creative power even more dramatically. People can develop detailed recollections of events that never happened, complete with sensory details and emotional responses. These fabricated memories feel entirely real to the person experiencing them, indistinguishable from genuine recollections. This reveals that the subjective experience of remembering depends not on historical accuracy, but on the brain's ability to construct coherent narratives from available information. The phenomenon of déjà vu suggests another mysterious aspect of memory's relationship to time. In these moments, the present suddenly feels like a repetition of a past experience, even though you know rationally that this exact situation has never occurred before. Some theories propose that déjà vu results from a brief temporal misalignment in memory processing, where the present moment gets mistakenly filed as a past experience before being recognized as current reality.
Collective memory adds another dimension to this temporal complexity. Societies remember events that individual members never experienced personally. Historical narratives, cultural traditions, and shared stories create a form of inherited memory that transcends individual lifespans. Through collective memory, you can remember events from centuries ago, participating in a form of time travel that extends beyond personal experience into the realm of cultural consciousness. The selectivity of memory reveals its function as an identity-building mechanism rather than a historical archive. You remember events that fit your sense of self and forget those that contradict your self-image. Memory serves not just to preserve the past, but to construct a coherent personal narrative that extends from your earliest recollections to your anticipated future. Through this selective remembering, you become the author of your own temporal story. Dreams offer perhaps the most mysterious form of memory-based time travel. During sleep, fragments of past experiences recombine in impossible ways, creating narratives that transcend normal temporal boundaries. Past and present merge freely in dreams, suggesting that the linear organization of time might be an artificial constraint imposed by waking consciousness rather than a fundamental feature of mental experience. As you prepare for sleep, notice how memories begin to flow more freely, how the boundaries between different time periods start to blur. In the approaching realm of dreams, memory will guide you through landscapes where all times exist simultaneously, where the past becomes present once again.
The philosophy of eternal recurrence. Imagine that every moment of your life, every thought, every breath, every decision you have ever made or will ever make repeats infinitely across eternity. This is the concept of eternal recurrence, a philosophical idea that suggests time is not linear but cyclical, with all events destined to repeat exactly as they have occurred, countless times throughout infinite cycles of existence. Friedrich Nietzsche popularized this concept in modern philosophy, though similar ideas appeared in ancient cultures. Nietzsche presented eternal recurrence not as a scientific theory, but as the ultimate test of life affirmation. If you knew that your entire existence would repeat exactly as it has unfolded, with all its joys and sufferings, triumphs and failures, would you still choose to live it? This question transforms every moment into a profound ethical decision. The implications of eternal recurrence extend far beyond personal philosophy. If every moment repeats infinitely, then this very instant of listening to these words has occurred countless times before and will occur countless times again. You have lived this exact life infinite times in the past and will live it infinite times in the future. Every relationship, every conversation, every meal you have ever eaten exists in an endless loop of repetition. This perspective radically alters the meaning of choice and responsibility. In a universe of eternal recurrence, your decisions carry infinite weight because they repeat eternally. Every act of kindness echoes through infinite cycles, but so does every moment of cruelty or neglect. The temporary becomes eternal, the fleeting becomes permanent. Your life transforms from a single journey to an infinite statement about existence itself. Ancient civilizations often embraced cyclical concepts of time. Hindu cosmology describes vast cycles of creation and destruction spanning billions of years. The universe emerges, evolves, reaches its peak, declines, and dissolves, only to begin the cycle anew.
These cosmic rhythms suggest that time operates according to principles of return rather than linear progression towards some ultimate destination. The Stoic philosophers approached eternal recurrence as a tool for cultivating acceptance and wisdom. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the repetitive nature of human experience, noting that the same types of events, the same kinds of people, the same basic dramas play out across generations. By recognizing these patterns, one could achieve a detached perspective that transcended the apparent novelty of immediate experience. Modern physics offers intriguing parallels to eternal recurrence through theories about the cyclical nature of the universe. Some cosmological models suggest that the universe undergoes infinite cycles of expansion and contraction, with each cycle potentially reproducing the exact same events. If the universe contains finite matter arranged in finite possible configurations, then given infinite time, every possible arrangement must eventually repeat. The psychological impact of contemplating eternal recurrence varies dramatically among individuals. Some find it deeply disturbing, a cosmic prison that traps consciousness in endless repetition. Others discover liberation in the idea, seeing it as the ultimate validation of existence. If life repeats eternally, then existence itself must possess infinite value, worthy of endless repetition. Eternal recurrence also transforms the relationship between time and identity. If you live this exact life infinite times, which iteration is the real you? Are you the same person across all cycles, or do infinite versions of you exist simultaneously? The question challenges conventional notions of personal continuity and uniqueness. As you drift toward rest, consider whether this moment of approaching sleep feels familiar in some deeper way, as if you have lived it countless times before and will live it countless times again, each repetition adding another meaningful layer to the infinite tapestry of eternal existence.
Temporal perception and consciousness. The relationship between consciousness and time reveals one of the deepest mysteries of existence. Your experience of duration, sequence, and temporal flow depends entirely on the peculiar nature of conscious awareness. Without consciousness, time becomes merely a coordinate in space-time equations, devoid of the subjective qualities that make it meaningful to human experience. Consider how your perception of time changes throughout a single day. Minutes crawl by during boring meetings, but vanish instantly during engaging conversations. A watched pot never boils, yet engrossing activities make hours disappear without notice. This elasticity of subjective time reveals that consciousness does not simply receive temporal information passively, but actively constructs the experience of duration based on attention, emotion, and cognitive processing. Neuroscientists have identified specific brain mechanisms responsible for temporal perception. The suprachiasmatic nucleus acts as your master clock, coordinating circadian rhythms with environmental light cycles. But smaller timescales require different neural networks. The cerebellum helps time motor movements, while the prefrontal cortex manages longer intervals and temporal planning. These distributed timing systems suggest that consciousness assembles temporal experience from multiple specialized processors. Different states of consciousness dramatically alter time perception. During intense focus or flow states, external time seems to slow down, while internal processing accelerates.
Athletes often report that critical moments unfold in slow motion, allowing them to perceive and react to events that would normally happen too quickly for conscious awareness. This suggests that consciousness can adjust its temporal resolution like a camera changing frame rates. Dreams present perhaps the most dramatic example of consciousness manipulating temporal experience. A dream lasting subjective hours can occur during minutes of REM sleep. Dream narratives often include impossible temporal sequences, where events happen simultaneously and sequentially, where past and future intermingle freely. This reveals that the linear organization of waking time might be an artificial constraint imposed by conscious attention, rather than a fundamental feature of mental experience. Meditation practices across cultures recognize the malleable nature of temporal consciousness. Advanced practitioners report achieving states where time seems to stop completely, where the present moment expands to contain eternity. These experiences suggest that ordinary temporal consciousness represents just one possible mode of organizing awareness, not the only way consciousness can relate to time. Psychoactive substances also demonstrate consciousness's role in constructing temporal experience. Different compounds alter time perception in characteristic ways, sometimes stretching moments into apparent eternities, other times compressing hours into fleeting instants. These pharmacological effects reveal that temporal experience depends on specific neurotransmitter systems that can be chemically modified. The phenomenon of temporal illusions further illustrates consciousness's active role in creating time experience. The stopped clock illusion makes the second hand appear frozen when you first glance at a clock. Your brain fills in the gap between deciding to look and actually seeing, creating the impression that the first moment lasted longer than subsequent ones. Such illusions reveal that temporal perception involves complex prediction and reconstruction processes. Cultural factors also influence temporal consciousness. Different societies organize time according to varying principles, from cyclical to linear, from event-based to clock-based systems. These cultural frameworks shape how individuals experience duration, urgency, and temporal meaning. Your personal relationship with time reflects not just biological processes, but also learned cultural patterns of temporal organization. As consciousness gradually releases its grip on structured temporal experience during the transition to sleep, notice how time begins to flow differently, becoming more fluid and less constrained by the logical sequences that govern waking awareness, preparing for the timeless realm of dreams.
The arrow of time problem. Why does time seem to flow in only one direction? This question, known as the arrow of time problem, touches the very foundation of our understanding of reality. While the fundamental laws of physics appear largely symmetric with respect to time, our direct experience reveals a universe where past and future occupy fundamentally different roles in the structure of existence. The most obvious arrow of time emerges from the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy in a closed system always increases over time. Hot coffee cools down, never the reverse. Broken glasses do not spontaneously reassemble. This thermodynamic arrow points from states of lower entropy toward states of higher entropy, creating an irreversible direction in physical processes that we interpret as the flow of time. Yet this thermodynamic explanation raises deeper questions. Why was the universe in such a low entropy state initially?
The Big Bang created a cosmos of extraordinary order and organization, with matter and energy distributed in highly improbable configurations. As the universe evolved, this initial order gradually dissolved into the more probable disordered states we observe today. The arrow of time might therefore reflect the universe's journey from its improbable beginning toward increasingly probable futures. The psychological arrow of time creates another layer of temporal asymmetry. You remember the past, but not the future. Causes precede effects in your experience. Decisions appear to influence subsequent events, but not previous ones. This psychological directionality feels so fundamental that imagining its reversal seems impossible. Yet this mental arrow might emerge from the same thermodynamic processes that govern physical systems. Memory formation requires energy expenditure and creates irreversible changes in neural structures. The act of remembering increases entropy in your brain, making memory formation a thermodynamically irreversible process. Perhaps the psychological arrow of time reflects the entropic cost of information processing, rather than revealing something fundamental about the nature of time itself. Quantum mechanics introduces additional complications to the arrow of time problem. At the quantum level, many processes appear perfectly time-reversible. Quantum equations work equally well when time runs forward or backward. The apparent irreversibility of quantum measurement might emerge from the statistical behavior of large numbers of quantum particles, rather than from fundamental temporal asymmetry. The cosmological arrow of time points in the direction of universal expansion. The universe grows larger and cooler as time progresses, creating a cosmic timeline that extends from the dense, hot conditions of the Big Bang toward the sparse, cold conditions of the far future. This expansion provides another potential foundation for temporal directionality that does not depend on local thermodynamic processes. Some theories propose that the arrow of time might be emergent rather than fundamental, arising from statistical mechanics rather than basic physical laws. In this view, time symmetry exists at the microscopic level, but asymmetry emerges at macroscopic scales due to boundary conditions and initial states. The direction of time becomes a consequence of the particular history of our universe, rather than a basic feature of temporal reality. The relationship between different arrows of time remains mysterious. Do the thermodynamic, psychological, and cosmological arrows necessarily point in the same direction? Could they diverge under different conditions? Some cosmological models suggest that in a contracting universe, the thermodynamic arrow might reverse while the psychological arrow continues forward, creating bizarre scenarios where memory and causation operate according to conflicting temporal directions. As you drift toward sleep, your consciousness gradually releases its grip on the linear arrow of time, entering dream states where causation becomes fluid and temporal direction loses its apparent inevitability.
Subjective versus objective time experience. The tension between subjective time experience and objective temporal measurement reveals a fundamental divide in our understanding of reality. Clock time ticks forward with mechanical precision, each second identical to every other, while lived time expands and contracts according to the rhythms of consciousness, emotion, and attention.
This divergence suggests that time might not be the unified phenomenon we typically assume. Objective time, as measured by atomic clocks and astronomical observations, provides the foundation for scientific understanding and social coordination. This time maintains consistency across different observers and locations, allowing us to synchronize activities and compare measurements across vast distances. Yet, this objective time feels alien to direct human experience, which operates according to entirely different temporal principles. Your subjective experience of duration depends heavily on psychological factors that have no bearing on clock measurements. Novel experiences seem to last longer than familiar ones. Time crawls during pain or boredom, but flies during pleasure or deep engagement. These variations suggest that consciousness does not simply track objective time, but constructs its own temporal reality, based on cognitive and emotional processing. The paradox of aging illustrates this temporal divergence clearly. As you grow older, each year represents a smaller fraction of your total life experience, making time appear to accelerate. Childhood summers seemed to last forever, while adult years pass in apparent moments. This acceleration occurs despite the fact that clocks continue ticking at exactly the same rate they always have. The subjective speeding of time reflects changes in memory formation and attention rather than any alteration in temporal reality itself. Cultural factors further complicate the relationship between subjective and objective time. Different societies organize temporal experience according to varying principles. Some cultures emphasize cyclical time patterns connected to natural rhythms, while others focus on linear progression toward future goals. These cultural frameworks shape how individuals experience duration, urgency, and temporal meaning, creating multiple subjective realities within the same objective time frame. Emergency situations reveal dramatic disconnections between subjective and objective time. During car accidents or other crises, witnesses often report that events unfolded in slow motion, allowing them to observe details that would normally happen too quickly for conscious perception. These altered time experiences suggest that consciousness can adjust its temporal resolution in response to situational demands, operating faster or slower than clock time requires. Flow states present another example of subjective temporal alteration. When deeply engaged in challenging activities that match your skill level, hours can pass without conscious awareness of their passage. This temporal dissolution indicates that self-consciousness and time awareness are closely linked. When attention becomes completely absorbed in present activity, the subjective sense of time passing can disappear entirely. Sleep and dreams create the most extreme divergence between subjective and objective time. Dreams can contain elaborate narratives spanning apparent days or years, yet occur during brief REM periods lasting minutes. Upon waking, the distinction between dream time and clock time becomes apparent, revealing that consciousness can construct entirely fictional temporal experiences that feel completely real while they unfold. Meditation practices often aim to explore the boundary between subjective and objective time. Advanced practitioners report achieving states where subjective time slows dramatically or stops completely, while maintaining awareness that objective time continues its regular progression. These experiences suggest that ordinary temporal consciousness represents just one possible relationship between awareness and time. The relationship between these two temporal realities remains philosophically puzzling. Perhaps subjective time represents the more fundamental reality, with objective time being a useful abstraction for coordination and measurement. Or perhaps both represent different aspects of a deeper temporal reality that transcends the subjective-objective distinction entirely. As you transition toward sleep, notice how subjective time begins to loosen its connection to clock time, preparing for dream states where temporal experience will follow entirely different rules.
Causality and free will debates. The relationship between causality and free will presents one of philosophy's most enduring puzzles, with profound implications for how we understand time, responsibility, and human agency. If every event results from prior causes stretching back to the beginning of time, can our choices ever be truly free? This question intertwines temporal mechanics with fundamental questions about the nature of human consciousness and moral responsibility. Deterministic physics suggests that the present state of the universe, combined with the laws of nature, completely determines all future states. In this view, your decision to listen to these words was inevitable given the precise arrangement of particles in your brain and environment moments before. Free will becomes an illusion created by our inability to perceive the complex causal chains that govern our behavior. Every choice emerges from prior neural states that themselves resulted from earlier causes, creating an unbroken chain extending back to the Big Bang. Yet quantum mechanics introduces fundamental randomness into physical processes, breaking the strict determinism of classical physics. Quantum events appear genuinely unpredictable, occurring according to probability distributions rather than deterministic laws. Some philosophers argue that this quantum indeterminacy creates space for free will to operate. However, random events do not necessarily provide the kind of agency we associate with moral responsibility. A choice that occurs randomly is not obviously more free than one that occurs deterministically. The experience of deliberation complicates deterministic accounts of decision-making. When you weigh options and consider consequences, you experience yourself as the author of your eventual choice. This sense of agency feels fundamentally different from watching predetermined events unfold. Yet neuroscience reveals that many decisions begin in unconscious brain processes before conscious awareness of choosing emerges. The famous experiments by Benjamin Libet showed that measurable brain activity associated with decisions occurs several hundred milliseconds before people report being aware of their intention to act. Compatibilists argue that free will and determinism can coexist by redefining what freedom means. In this view, free actions are those that flow from your own desires and reasoning processes, even if those processes are themselves determined by prior causes. You act freely when external constraints do not force your behavior and when your actions reflect your authentic preferences and values. The causal history of your preferences does not negate their genuineness or your responsibility for actions that flow from them. The temporal structure of decision-making reveals additional complexities. Choices often involve projecting yourself into hypothetical futures and evaluating potential outcomes. This temporal projection requires a sophisticated understanding of causality that allows you to predict how current actions might influence future states.
Free will, if it exists, operates through this capacity for temporal reasoning and future-directed planning. Different conceptions of time lead to different perspectives on free will. In a block universe where all times exist equally, your future choices already exist in space-time, suggesting that freedom might be incompatible with the eternal reality of all temporal moments. Alternatively, if time is genuinely open and the future remains undetermined, then space does exist for genuine choice and moral responsibility. The practical implications of free will debates extend beyond academic philosophy. Legal systems assume that people bear responsibility for their actions, while therapeutic approaches often emphasize personal agency in creating positive change. These social institutions reflect deep commitments to human freedom that persist despite philosophical uncertainties about determinism and causality. Recent developments in neuroscience and psychology reveal that the experience of free will correlates with psychological well-being and moral behavior. People who believe in their own agency tend to act more ethically and experience greater life satisfaction. This suggests that the belief in free will might be practically important regardless of its ultimate metaphysical status. As you approach sleep, notice how the sense of conscious control gradually diminishes, yet dreams will soon present choices and decisions that feel entirely real within their own temporal framework.
The experience of timelessness. In certain moments, time seems to stop completely. Whether during deep meditation, profound artistic creation, or intense absorption in meaningful activity, the ordinary flow of temporal experience can dissolve entirely, leaving consciousness suspended in an eternal present that transcends normal temporal boundaries. These timeless experiences offer glimpses into radically different ways of relating to time and existence. Mystics across cultures have reported states of consciousness where temporal awareness disappears completely. In these moments, the usual succession of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions gives way to a unified awareness that encompasses past, present, and future simultaneously. Duration becomes meaningless when consciousness expands beyond the limited perspective of moment-to-moment experience. The mystic discovers a dimension of reality that exists outside temporal flow, an eternal now that serves as the foundation for all temporal experience. Creative artists often describe similar dissolutions of time during peak creative states. Writers speak of hours passing like minutes, while characters and stories unfold through their consciousness with apparent autonomy. Musicians lose themselves in improvisational flow, where temporal structure transforms from a constraint into a medium of expression. Visual artists report that paintings seem to paint themselves, while ordinary time consciousness recedes into the background. These creative timeless states suggest that temporal awareness might actually interfere with certain forms of consciousness, rather than being essential to all mental activity. The phenomenology of timelessness reveals interesting paradoxes. While the experience itself feels eternal and outside temporal flow, it occurs within definite time periods as measured by external observers. A mystical experience that subjectively lasts for eternity might objectively span only minutes or hours. This discrepancy suggests that timelessness represents a particular mode of consciousness rather than an escape from temporal reality itself. Neuroscience offers insights into the brain mechanisms underlying timeless experiences. Default mode network activity, which typically maintains self-referential thinking and temporal continuity,
shows decreased activation during reported states of timelessness. Simultaneously, areas associated with present moment awareness and unified perception become more active. This neurological pattern suggests that timelessness emerges when the brain's ordinary temporal processing systems temporarily suspend their normal functioning. Philosophical implications of timeless experience extend to fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and reality. If awareness can exist outside temporal flow, what does this reveal about the relationship between mind and time? Perhaps consciousness in its purest form transcends temporal limitations, with ordinary time experience representing a secondary elaboration rather than a fundamental feature of awareness itself. Different meditation traditions have developed specific techniques for cultivating timeless states. Concentration practices that focus attention on unchanging objects or concepts can lead to absorption states where temporal awareness dissolves. Mindfulness approaches that observe the arising and passing of mental events can reveal the timeless awareness within which all temporal experiences occur. These contemplative technologies suggest that timelessness might be accessible through systematic mental training. The relationship between timeless experience and personal identity raises intriguing questions. During profound timeless states, the usual sense of being a particular person with a specific history and future often disappears. What remains is pure awareness without personal content or temporal location. This suggests that personal identity might be more dependent on temporal continuity than typically recognized. Emergency situations sometimes trigger spontaneous timeless experiences. During life-threatening events, people report that external time seems to slow dramatically, while internal awareness expands to encompass vast amounts of information and possibility. These crisis-induced timeless states might represent the mind's attempt to transcend temporal limitations when ordinary time consciousness proves inadequate. As you approach the threshold of sleep, your consciousness naturally begins to loosen its grip on temporal structure, preparing for dream states where timelessness and temporal flow interweave in ways that transcend waking logic.
Philosophical implications of entropy. Entropy stands as one of the most profound concepts linking physics with philosophy, revealing deep connections between the nature of time, information, and the meaning of existence itself. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy in isolated systems always increases, creating an irreversible arrow of time that points from order toward disorder. Yet this seemingly simple principle carries implications that reach far beyond physics into questions about consciousness, purpose, and the ultimate fate of reality. The concept of entropy emerges from statistical mechanics, where it measures the number of microscopic arrangements that correspond to a given macroscopic state. A perfectly organized system has low entropy because only a few microscopic configurations can produce that organized macroscopic appearance. As systems evolve, they naturally move towards states with higher entropy because there are vastly more ways to be disorganized than organized. This statistical tendency creates the temporal asymmetry we experience as the flow of time. Living organisms present fascinating challenges to simple entropy interpretations. Life creates local decreases in entropy by organizing simple molecules into complex biological structures. A growing tree transforms carbon dioxide and water into intricate cellular arrangements that represent substantial increases in organization.
However, this biological organization comes at the cost of increased entropy in the environment. The sun's energy drives photosynthesis, but solar fusion increases universal entropy faster than life decreases local entropy. Consciousness adds another layer of complexity to entropy considerations. The human brain processes information in ways that seem to extract meaning and pattern from chaotic sensory input. Thoughts, memories, and experiences represent forms of organized information that appear to resist entropic dissolution. Yet, maintaining consciousness requires constant energy expenditure and generates heat, ultimately contributing to universal entropy increase. The mind emerges as a temporary eddy of organization in the cosmic flow toward maximum entropy. Information theory reveals deep connections between entropy and knowledge. Claude Shannon showed that information content correlates inversely with entropy. Highly ordered messages contain more information than random noise. This relationship suggests that the universe's evolution from order toward disorder represents a gradual loss of information content. As entropy increases, the capacity for meaningful information storage and transmission decreases correspondingly. The heat-death scenario represents entropy's ultimate philosophical implication. If the universe continues expanding and entropy continues increasing, all energy will eventually reach thermal equilibrium at maximum entropy. No temperature differences will remain to drive physical processes. Stars will burn out, black holes will evaporate, and all organized structures will dissolve into uniform particle distributions. This entropic endpoint suggests that all consciousness and meaning might be temporary phenomena destined for eventual erasure. Yet, quantum mechanics introduces uncertainties into entropic predictions. Quantum fluctuations might allow spontaneous decreases in entropy even in thermal equilibrium states. Some theories propose that quantum effects could enable periodic returns to low entropy conditions, creating cycles of cosmic death and rebirth. These possibilities suggest that entropy might not represent an absolute temporal boundary, but rather a statistical tendency. The anthropic principle offers another perspective on entropy's philosophical significance. Perhaps conscious observers can exist only during specific phases of cosmic evolution, when entropy levels permit complex organization. The universe's current state, with moderate entropy allowing both stability and change, might represent optimal conditions for consciousness emergence. From this view, entropy provides the necessary backdrop against which meaningful existence becomes possible. Different philosophical traditions interpret entropy's implications differently. Some find existential despair in entropy's inevitability, seeing it as proof that ultimate meaning is impossible. Others discover liberation in entropy's reminder that all structures are temporary, encouraging focus on present experience rather than permanent achievements. As you settle deeper into rest, consider how your consciousness participates in this cosmic dance between order and disorder, creating temporary patterns of meaning within the vast entropic flow of universal time.
The metaphysics of past and future. The ontological status of past and future events raises fundamental questions about the nature of temporal reality. Do past events continue to exist somewhere, or are they annihilated the moment they cease to be present? Does the future already exist in some sense, waiting to be revealed, or is it genuinely open and undetermined? These metaphysical questions about temporal existence shape how we understand memory, anticipation, responsibility, and human action.
Presentism maintains that only the present moment truly exists. Past events have ceased to be real, while future events have not yet achieved reality. In this view, the past survives only through its traces in the present: memories, documents, physical effects, and causal influences. The future remains genuinely open, determined only as present events unfold into subsequent moments. This position aligns closely with common sense temporal experience, but faces challenges from modern physics. Eternalism proposes that past, present, and future all exist equally. From this perspective, the entire history of the universe forms a four-dimensional block where all events, regardless of their temporal location, possess the same ontological status. Your birth, this moment of listening, and your death all exist simultaneously in the eternal structure of space-time. The apparent flow of time becomes a subjective illusion created by consciousness moving through static temporal dimensions. The growing block theory attempts to reconcile these perspectives by proposing that past and present events exist, while future events remain unreal until they become present. Reality continuously grows as new moments are added to the existing temporal structure. This view preserves genuine temporal becoming while acknowledging the apparent reality of past events suggested by relativity theory. Each metaphysical position carries distinct implications for human agency and moral responsibility. If eternalism is correct and all events exist timelessly, then your future actions already exist in the block universe. This raises questions about whether genuine choice is possible when future decisions seem to exist independently of present deliberation. Alternatively, if presentism is true, then your choices help create a future that does not yet exist, preserving robust agency. The persistence of personal identity across time depends partly on temporal metaphysics. If only the present exists, then past and future versions of yourself are not real, raising questions about what makes you the same person over time. If all temporal stages exist equally, then personal identity becomes a matter of connecting different temporal parts rather than maintaining continuity through change. Memory presents particular puzzles for temporal metaphysics. When you remember past events, what exactly are you accessing? If the past no longer exists, then memory cannot be a form of direct contact with previous events. Instead, memory must involve present representations of non-existent past states. This makes memory accuracy mysterious, since it requires correspondence between present mental states and absent temporal realities. Temporal metaphysics also affects understanding of causation. Causes typically precede their effects temporally, but what does this mean if past and future have different ontological statuses? If causes must exist to produce effects, then presentism seems to make causation impossible, since causes cease to exist before their effects occur. Eternalism avoids this problem by making all events equally real. Quantum mechanics introduces additional complications to temporal metaphysics. The measurement problem suggests that quantum events might not have determinate outcomes until observation occurs. This could support views where the future remains genuinely open until present measurements collapse quantum possibilities into definite realities. Many worlds interpretations propose that all quantum possibilities exist in parallel universes. The practical implications of temporal metaphysics extend to ethics, decision-making, and life planning. Beliefs about the reality of past and future influence how people approach regret, anticipation, and responsibility. These metaphysical commitments shape emotional responses to temporal experience. As you drift towards sleep, consider which temporal metaphysics resonates with your deepest intuitions of existence, and how these philosophical commitments influence your relationship with past memories and future possibilities.
Time as the fourth dimension. Einstein's revolutionary insight transformed time from an absolute backdrop for physical events into a dynamic dimension interwoven with space itself. This conceptual shift from separate space and time to unified space-time represents one of the most profound changes in human understanding of reality. Time becomes not merely the stage upon which physics unfolds, but an active participant in the cosmic drama, capable of stretching, contracting, and curving in response to matter and energy. In Newtonian physics, time flowed uniformly throughout the universe, providing a universal reference frame that all observers could share. A second on Earth lasted exactly the same duration as a second on Jupiter or in the farthest galaxy. This absolute time seemed intuitively obvious and aligned perfectly with everyday experience. Yet Einstein's special relativity revealed that time's passage depends fundamentally on the observer's state of motion relative to what they measure. The mathematics of spacetime treats time as analogous to spatial dimensions, but with a crucial difference indicated by the minus sign in the spacetime metric. While spatial dimensions contribute positively to the spacetime interval, time contributes negatively, creating the unique geometry of Minkowski spacetime. This mathematical structure reflects the fundamental asymmetry between time-like and space-like separations that preserves causality while allowing relative simultaneity. Time dilation represents the most striking consequence of treating time as a dimension. Moving clocks run slower relative to stationary observers, not due to mechanical effects, but because of the geometry of spacetime itself. High-speed travel literally stretches time, allowing travelers to experience less elapsed time than those they leave behind. This effect becomes dramatic near the speed of light, where time can slow to a crawl relative to external observers. Gravitational time dilation reveals another aspect of temporal dimensionality. Strong gravitational fields curve spacetime, causing time to pass more slowly in regions of intense gravity compared to weaker gravitational environments. Clocks run slower on Earth's surface than in orbit, slower on the Sun than on Earth, and slower still near black holes, where spacetime curvature becomes extreme. Gravity affects time not as a force, but as a manifestation of spacetime geometry. The twin paradox illustrates the practical implications of dimensional time. A traveler departing Earth at high speed and returning years later will have aged less than those who remained behind. This apparent paradox resolves when considering that the traveling twin experiences acceleration and follows a different path through spacetime. The symmetry between reference frames breaks during acceleration phases, creating genuine age differences upon reunion. Black holes create the most extreme distortions of spacetime dimensionality. Near the event horizon, time dilation becomes so severe that external observers see infalling objects frozen in time, their light redshifted to invisibility. Yet from the perspective of falling observers, time continues normally as they cross the horizon and approach the singularity, where spacetime curvature becomes infinite. The block universe interpretation emerges naturally from treating time as a dimension.
If time is genuinely analogous to space, then past and future exist as distant locations in space. The entire history of the universe forms a four-dimensional structure where all events coexist eternally. Temporal becoming reduces to consciousness moving through static temporal dimensions. Quantum mechanics complicates the dimensional picture of time. Quantum field theory successfully incorporates special relativity, treating space-time as the arena for quantum processes. However, the measurement problem creates tensions between quantum evolution and relativistic spacetime. The apparent instantaneous collapse of quantum states conflicts with relativistic prohibitions against faster-than-light influences. The practical applications of dimensional time permeate modern technology. GPS satellites must account for both special and general relativistic time effects to maintain accuracy. Without corrections for orbital velocity and gravitational differences, GPS positioning would drift by several kilometers daily. As you approach sleep, imagine your consciousness as a point moving through the four-dimensional landscape of spacetime, tracing a unique path called your world line through the eternal structure where all moments of your existence coexist.
The Phenomenology of Duration. Duration represents more than simply the measurement of temporal intervals. It encompasses the qualitative experience of time passing, the felt sense of temporal flow that varies dramatically depending on consciousness, attention, and emotional state. The phenomenology of duration explores how lived time differs from clock time, revealing that temporal experience emerges from complex interactions between perception, memory, and anticipation. Edmund Husserl identified duration as a fundamental structure of consciousness itself. Every experience possesses temporal thickness, spanning from retention of the immediate past through the primal impression of the present to protension toward the anticipated future. This temporal synthesis occurs automatically in consciousness, binding momentary experiences into coherent streams of awareness that feel continuous despite their composite structure. The experience of duration changes dramatically across different activities and mental states. Absorbed in engaging work, hours can pass unnoticed, while waiting in anxiety makes minutes feel like hours. This temporal elasticity suggests that duration depends more on the quality of attention than on objective time measurement. When consciousness is fully occupied, temporal self-awareness diminishes, creating the subjective impression that time has accelerated or even stopped. Emotional states profoundly influence duration experience. Fear and pain stretch subjective time, making brief periods feel interminable. Joy and love can create opposite effects, where meaningful moments seem to pass instantly yet leave lasting impressions of richness and depth. These emotional modulations of duration suggest that temporal experience reflects the evaluative aspects of consciousness rather than neutral temporal measurement. Age significantly affects duration perception through changes in both cognitive processing and life experience proportions. For children, a year represents a substantial fraction of their total existence, making it feel longer than it does for adults. Additionally, novel experiences create richer memories that make time periods feel more substantial in retrospect. As people age and encounter fewer novel situations, years can seem to accelerate. The relationship between attention and duration creates interesting paradoxes. Paying attention to time's passage typically makes it feel slower, as when watching a clock or waiting for an appointment. Yet this same attention can also make time feel more substantial and meaningful. Mindfulness practices exploit this relationship, using attention to duration as a tool for enriching temporal experience.
Memory plays a crucial role in duration experience through what psychologists call the reminiscence bump. When recalling life events, certain periods feel more temporally dense than others, often corresponding to times of significant change or emotional intensity. These memory-rich periods feel like they lasted longer than equally long but less eventful periods. Boredom creates a particular type of duration distortion, where time seems to slow dramatically while simultaneously feeling meaningless. This state reveals that duration experience depends not just on attention, but on the sense that temporal passage serves some purpose or contains some value. Without engagement or meaning, even brief periods can feel endless and oppressive. Flow states represent the opposite extreme, where duration consciousness disappears entirely while engagement reaches maximum intensity. Athletes, artists, and others in flow often report complete loss of time awareness, emerging from hours of activity feeling as though only minutes have passed. These states suggest that optimal experience might involve transcending ordinary duration consciousness. Dreams present extreme examples of duration distortion, where elaborate narratives spanning apparent hours or days can occur during brief REM periods. Dream duration demonstrates that consciousness can construct completely fictional temporal experiences that feel entirely real while they unfold. The phenomenology of duration reveals that lived time possesses qualities absent from mathematical time measurement. Temporal experience involves texture, rhythm, depth, and meaning that cannot be captured by clocks or calendars. As you settle into the approaching transition to sleep, notice how your experience of duration begins to shift and soften, becoming less defined and more fluid as consciousness releases its ordinary temporal structure.
Circular time in ancient philosophy. Long before linear progression dominated Western thought, ancient civilizations conceived time as fundamentally circular, marked by eternal cycles of birth, death, and rebirth that repeated endlessly across cosmic spans. These circular temporal frameworks reflected deep observations about natural rhythms and offered profound alternatives to modern assumptions about historical progress and temporal direction. Greek philosophy developed sophisticated circular time concepts through thinkers like Heraclitus and the Stoics. Heraclitus proposed that the cosmos undergoes periodic conflagrations where everything returns to primordial fire before being reborn in exactly the same configuration. This doctrine of eternal recurrence suggested that every event, every thought, every moment repeats infinitely across cosmic cycles. The Stoics elaborated this vision, describing great years lasting thousands of regular years, during which all celestial bodies return to their original positions. Hindu cosmology presents perhaps the most elaborate circular time system through concepts of cosmic cycles called kalpas and yugas. These vast temporal wheels span billions of years, encompassing ages of creation, preservation, and destruction that repeat eternally. During each cycle, the universe emerges from potential, develops through various stages of manifestation, reaches peak expression, then gradually declines until final dissolution returns everything to unmanifested state. Buddhist philosophy adopts similar cyclical frameworks while emphasizing the possibility of escaping temporal cycles through enlightenment. Samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, traps conscious beings in endless repetition until wisdom liberates them from temporal bondage. Yet even Buddhist liberation occurs within larger cosmic cycles where universes themselves arise and pass away according to eternal patterns.
Aztec and Mayan civilizations developed intricate circular calendars that interwove multiple cyclical patterns of different lengths. Their sophisticated mathematical astronomy tracked various celestial cycles simultaneously, creating complex temporal mandalas where different rhythms intersected to create meaningful moments. These calendrical systems reflected deep understanding that time possesses multiple simultaneous layers, each operating according to its own circular logic. Norse mythology describes time through Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods that ends one cosmic cycle while preparing for the next. This apocalyptic vision portrays destruction not as final ending, but as necessary renewal that clears space for fresh creation. The cosmic tree Yggdrasil provides eternal stability around which temporal cycles revolve. Egyptian civilization structured time around the eternal cycle of the Nile's flooding, which provided both practical calendar and metaphysical framework. Their mythology emphasized eternal return through stories of gods who die and resurrect, reflecting natural cycles of solar movement and agricultural renewal. Death becomes not termination, but transformation within ongoing circular processes. Circular time concepts often accompany different attitudes toward novelty and progress compared to linear frameworks. In circular systems, apparent innovations represent rediscoveries of eternal patterns rather than genuine creation of unprecedented realities. This perspective can encourage acceptance of repetition while discouraging anxiety about uncertain futures. Modern physics offers intriguing parallels to ancient circular time through cosmological models of cyclical universes. Some theories propose that cosmic expansion might eventually reverse into contraction, leading to new Big Bangs that repeat universal cycles. Quantum mechanics introduces probability cycles and field oscillations that echo ancient insights about repetitive temporal patterns. The psychological implications of circular time differ markedly from linear frameworks. Circular time can provide comfort through its promise of eternal return while creating anxiety about endless repetition. Linear time offers hope for genuine progress while threatening ultimate finitude. Contemporary interest in sustainable living and ecological thinking has revived appreciation for circular temporal models. Recognition that natural systems operate through cyclical processes rather than linear consumption has encouraged temporal frameworks that emphasize renewal, regeneration, and responsible stewardship. As you prepare for sleep, consider how your daily cycle of waking and sleeping participates in the ancient wisdom of circular time, where endings become beginnings and rest prepares for renewal.
The paradox of temporal becoming. The concept of temporal becoming presents one of philosophy's most enduring puzzles. How can events transition from future possibility to present actuality, to past completion? This process seems fundamental to our experience, yet when examined closely, it reveals deep logical difficulties that challenge our basic assumptions about the nature of time and change. The problem begins with the observation that becoming appears to require the passage of time, yet time itself seems to be what becomes. Events become present by moving from future to past, but this movement presupposes temporal passage that we are trying to explain. The rate of becoming raises particular difficulties. At what speed does time pass? If time passes at 1 second per second, this seems circular and uninformative.
McTaggart's famous argument against the reality of time exploits these difficulties through his analysis of temporal series. The A series arranges events according to pastness, presentness, and futurity, while the B series orders them through earlier than and later than relations. McTaggart argued that genuine temporal becoming requires the A series, since only these properties capture the dynamic quality of temporal passage. Yet every event must possess all three A properties at different times, creating contradictions. The moving spotlight theory attempts to preserve temporal becoming by proposing that an objective present moment moves along the timeline, illuminating different events as present while others remain past or future. This spotlight creates genuine temporal becoming as events transition between different temporal states. However, critics argue that this theory requires a higher order time in which the spotlight moves. Presentism offers another approach by maintaining that only present events exist, with past and future events lacking reality altogether. In this view, temporal becoming occurs as events come into existence, enjoy brief presentness, then fade into non-existence. This preserves robust becoming, but conflicts with relativity theory, which suggests that simultaneity is relative to reference frames. The growing block theory provides a compromise by allowing past and present events to exist while denying reality to future events. Temporal becoming occurs as new events are added to reality, expanding the existing temporal structure. This view avoids some difficulties with presentism while preserving genuine temporal creation. Eternalism eliminates temporal becoming entirely by proposing that all events exist equally in a four-dimensional spacetime manifold. From this perspective, the appearance of temporal becoming results from the particular way consciousness encounters different temporal regions, similar to how spatial motion creates the illusion of spatial becoming. Some philosophers argue that temporal becoming might be an emergent property of complex systems rather than a fundamental feature of time itself. In this view, becoming arises from the statistical behavior of large numbers of particles or from the particular way information processing systems sample their temporal environment. Quantum mechanics introduces novel perspectives on temporal becoming through the measurement problem. If quantum systems exist in superposition until measurement collapses them into definite states, then temporal becoming might involve the continuous actualization of quantum possibilities. This suggests that consciousness might play a fundamental role in creating temporal reality. Recent work in theoretical physics explores scenarios where temporal becoming might emerge from more fundamental atemporal processes. Loop quantum gravity and causal set theory propose that spacetime itself might emerge from discrete quantum structures, where becoming represents the growth of underlying networks. The practical implications of different views about temporal becoming extend to questions about responsibility, planning, and meaning. If becoming is real, then the future remains genuinely open, and our choices help create reality. As you approach the threshold between waking and sleeping, notice how your sense of temporal becoming gradually dissolves, preparing for dream states where becoming follows entirely different rules.
Time consciousness and identity. The relationship between time consciousness and personal identity reveals fundamental connections between temporal experience and the sense of self. Who you are across time depends intimately on how consciousness organizes temporal experience, creating continuity from fragmented moments and constructing coherent narratives from the flux of sensation, memory, and anticipation. Personal identity traditionally requires some form of continuity across temporal change. You remain the same person despite physical and mental transformations because something persists through time, connecting your present self to past and future versions. Yet this continuity depends on temporal consciousness that binds different moments into unified experience. Memory serves as the primary mechanism linking temporal experience to personal identity. Your memories create a personal past that belongs specifically to you, distinguishing your identity from others who possess different memory collections. However, memory is not simply passive storage, but active reconstruction that shapes identity through selective emphasis and narrative organization. You become the stories you tell about your temporal existence. The relationship between memory and identity creates interesting puzzles about the boundaries of selfhood. If you lost all memories while retaining your physical body, would you remain the same person? Conversely, if your memories were transplanted into a different physical form, where would your identity reside? These thought experiments reveal that personal identity depends more on psychological continuity than physical persistence. Anticipation and future projection also contribute to identity formation through the temporal extension of selfhood into imagined futures. Your plans, goals, and projects create temporal bridges that connect present decisions to anticipated outcomes. Identity involves not just who you have been, but who you intend to become. The phenomenology of identity reveals that selfhood feels both continuous and discontinuous across time. You experience yourself as the same person who existed yesterday, while simultaneously recognizing significant changes in thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. This paradox suggests that identity involves both invariant structures that persist through change and dynamic processes that allow for growth. Different theories of time consciousness lead to different implications for personal identity. If consciousness constructs temporal experience from discrete moments, then identity must bridge gaps between these separate experiences. If consciousness involves continuous flow, then identity might emerge from this temporal stream rather than requiring additional connecting mechanisms. The social dimension of identity complicates its relationship to time consciousness. Other people recognize you as the same person across time based on external criteria, like physical appearance and behavioral patterns. This social recognition reinforces personal identity, but can also conflict with subjective experience. Cultural factors influence how individuals understand their temporal identity through different narrative frameworks. Some cultures emphasize continuity and tradition, encouraging identity stories that stress consistency across generations. Others emphasize change and self-creation, promoting narratives of transformation and reinvention. Pathological cases provide insights into the normal relationship between time consciousness and identity. Patients with severe memory disorders may lose the ability to construct coherent temporal identities, experiencing themselves as perpetually present without meaningful connection to their past or future. The digital age introduces novel challenges to temporal identity through the preservation and accessibility of past selves.
Social media creates permanent records of past thoughts and actions that can conflict with current identity. This external memory system can either strengthen identity continuity or create anxiety about past versions. Neuroscience reveals that identity involves specific brain networks that integrate temporal information across different timescales. The default mode network appears crucial for constructing the narrative self that extends across time. Disruption of these networks through brain injury or meditation can alter the sense of temporal identity. As you approach sleep, notice how your sense of personal identity becomes more fluid and less defined, preparing for dream states where identity can transform dramatically while somehow remaining recognizably yours throughout nocturnal consciousness.
The paradox of temporal flow. The apparent flow of time presents one of the most perplexing paradoxes in philosophy and physics. We experience time as flowing from past through present to future, carrying events along in its current, like leaves on a river. Yet, when we attempt to analyze this temporal flow scientifically or philosophically, it dissolves into logical contradictions and conceptual puzzles. The fundamental problem with temporal flow involves explaining what moves and at what rate. If time flows, then something must be moving through time. But what could this be? Events themselves cannot move through time because they are located at specific temporal positions. The present moment might be said to move, but this requires a higher order time in which the present travels, leading to infinite regress. Attempting to specify the rate of temporal flow creates additional difficulties. Common expressions like time flies or time crawls suggest that temporal passage occurs at varying speeds. But this presupposes a standard against which temporal flow can be measured. If we say time passes at 1 second per second, this appears circular and uninformative. The distinction between time and spatial dimensions complicates the flow analogy. We can meaningfully speak of moving through space because we can occupy different spatial locations sequentially through time. But we cannot move through time in the same way because there is no external temporal dimension through which such movement could occur. Einstein's relativity theory undermines objective temporal flow by revealing that simultaneity is relative to reference frames. There is no universal present moment that moves through time, dividing past from future for all observers simultaneously. What counts as present depends on the observer's state of motion, making objective temporal flow impossible. Despite these difficulties, the experience of temporal flow feels undeniably real and immediate. Conscious experience seems inherently temporal, with thoughts and sensations arising and passing away in continuous succession. This phenomenological flow appears independent of physical time, suggesting that temporal passage might be a feature of consciousness rather than external reality. Some philosophers propose that temporal flow emerges from the particular way consciousness samples temporal information. The brain processes events sequentially, creating the impression of flow through its limited capacity to integrate information across time. In this view, temporal flow results from cognitive constraints rather than objective temporal features.
The psychological arrow of time contributes to flow experience through asymmetric memory and anticipation. We remember the past but anticipate the future, creating a sense of temporal direction that feels like movement from known past toward unknown future. This psychological asymmetry might generate flow experience even without objective temporal passage. Thermodynamics offers another perspective on temporal flow through the increase of entropy. The universe evolves from lower to higher entropy states, creating an objective temporal direction that could ground flow experience. However, entropy increase provides temporal direction without requiring temporal passage. Quantum mechanics introduces additional complexity through the measurement problem. If quantum systems exist in superposition until measurement collapses them into definite states, then temporal flow might involve the continuous actualization of quantum possibilities. Recent developments in theoretical physics explore scenarios where temporal flow might emerge from more atemporal processes. Some approaches to quantum gravity propose that space-time itself emerges from discrete quantum events. The relationship between temporal flow and causal efficacy raises important questions about agency and responsibility. If temporal flow is illusory, how can our decisions influence subsequent events? Causal powers seem to require genuine temporal passage. Different cultures conceptualize temporal flow in varying ways, from linear streams to cyclical currents to eternal presence. These cultural differences suggest that flow experience might be partly constructed through learned conceptual frameworks. As you drift toward sleep, notice how your experience of temporal flow begins to change and dissolve, preparing for dream states where time moves according to entirely different principles.
Temporal asymmetry and direction. The universe exhibits a profound temporal asymmetry that distinguishes past from future in ways that seem fundamental to the structure of reality. This temporal direction manifests through multiple independent arrows that align mysteriously, creating the unified sense of temporal flow that governs both physical processes and conscious experience. The thermodynamic arrow of time emerges from the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy in isolated systems increases over time. This creates an irreversible temporal direction from states of lower entropy toward states of higher entropy. Hot coffee cools to room temperature, never the reverse. Broken glasses do not spontaneously reassemble. These processes define a clear temporal direction. Yet, the thermodynamic arrow raises puzzling questions about its origin. Why was the early universe in such an extraordinarily low entropy state? The Big Bang created a cosmos of remarkable order and organization, with matter and energy distributed in highly improbable configurations. As the universe evolved, this initial order gradually dissolved into the more probable disordered states we observe today. The cosmological arrow of time points in the direction of universal expansion. The universe grows larger and cooler as time progresses, creating a cosmic timeline that extends from the dense, hot conditions of the Big Bang toward the sparse, cold conditions predicted for the far future. This expansion provides an independent temporal direction that correlates with thermodynamic entropy increase.
The electromagnetic arrow of time distinguishes between advanced and retarded solutions to Maxwell's equations. Electromagnetic waves typically propagate outward from their sources toward the future, creating expanding spheres of influence. The time-reversed situation, where electromagnetic waves converge on sources from all directions, appears physically unreasonable despite being mathematically valid. The psychological arrow of time creates asymmetric relationships between past and future through memory and anticipation. We remember events that occurred before the present moment, but cannot remember events that will occur after it. This creates a subjective temporal direction that aligns with thermodynamic and cosmological arrows. Quantum mechanics introduces additional complexity through the measurement problem and the apparent irreversibility of quantum state collapse. Quantum systems evolve reversibly according to the Schrödinger equation, but measurement seems to introduce irreversible transitions from superposition to definite states. The relationship between different temporal arrows remains mysterious. Do they necessarily point in the same direction, or could they diverge under different conditions? Some cosmological models suggest that in a contracting universe, the thermodynamic arrow might reverse while the psychological arrow continues forward. Causal asymmetry provides another manifestation of temporal direction, through the principle that causes precede their effects. This causal arrow aligns with other temporal asymmetries and might provide their common foundation. If causation creates temporal order, then understanding causal relationships could illuminate the origin of temporal direction. The weak nuclear force exhibits a subtle temporal asymmetry through CP violation, where certain particle interactions behave differently when time is reversed. This provides direct physical evidence for fundamental temporal asymmetry at the level of elementary particles. Information theory offers another perspective on temporal asymmetry through the relationship between information and entropy. The creation, processing, and destruction of information might provide a fundamental basis for temporal direction. Since information processing requires energy expenditure, it necessarily increases entropy. Black holes create extreme environments where different temporal asymmetries might diverge. Near the event horizon, gravitational time dilation becomes so severe that infalling matter appears frozen from external perspectives while continuing to evolve normally from local viewpoints. Contemporary research in theoretical physics explores scenarios where temporal asymmetry might emerge from more symmetric processes. Some approaches to quantum gravity propose that time itself emerges from timeless quantum processes. As consciousness gradually releases its grip on structured temporal experience during the transition to sleep, the various arrows of time begin to lose their apparent coordination, preparing for dream states where temporal direction follows different principles.
The ultimate nature of temporal being. As we reach the culmination of our philosophical journey through time, we confront the ultimate question that underlies all temporal inquiry. What is the fundamental nature of temporal being itself? This deepest of questions transcends specific theories about time's properties to address the very essence of temporality as a basic feature of existence. The question of temporal being touches the very foundation of reality. Why does existence unfold through temporal sequences, rather than existing as a timeless, eternal present? What makes temporal becoming possible, and what would reality be like without the dimension of time?
These questions push beyond physics and philosophy into fundamental ontology. Different philosophical traditions have approached temporal being through varying frameworks. Some propose that time represents the most basic feature of existence, the primordial condition that makes all other phenomena possible. In this view, temporal becoming provides the foundation for consciousness, causation, and change. Without time, there could be no experience, no events, no meaningful existence. Alternative perspectives suggest that temporal being emerges from more fundamental atemporal processes. Perhaps time arises from quantum fluctuations in a timeless void, or from mathematical structures that exist outside temporal frameworks entirely. These approaches attempt to explain temporal being by reducing it to non-temporal foundations. The relationship between consciousness and temporal being presents particularly deep puzzles. Does consciousness require time to exist, or does temporal experience emerge from the particular structure of conscious awareness? Some argue that consciousness necessarily involves temporal synthesis, binding past retention and future protension into present experience. Others propose that pure consciousness transcends temporal limitations. Eastern philosophical traditions often emphasize the illusory nature of temporal being, while pointing toward timeless awareness as ultimate reality. In these frameworks, temporal experience represents a kind of cosmic dream that unfolds within eternal consciousness. Liberation involves recognizing the timeless nature of deepest being. The cosmological perspective raises questions about whether temporal being extends throughout the universe or emerges only in specific regions where conscious observers exist. If time is fundamental to reality, then temporal becoming should occur everywhere. If time is observer-dependent, vast regions might exist in timeless states. Quantum mechanics introduces novel possibilities for understanding temporal being through the relationship between measurement and temporal reality. If quantum processes involve genuine indeterminacy that gets resolved through observation, then consciousness might play a fundamental role in creating temporal becoming. The mathematical nature of physical laws raises questions about the ontological status of temporal being. If the universe operates according to timeless mathematical principles, then temporal experience might represent the subjective perspective of embedded observers rather than objective temporal becoming. Recent developments in theoretical physics explore scenarios where temporal being might emerge from more fundamental quantum processes. Some approaches to quantum gravity propose that space and time themselves arise from discrete quantum events. Art, music, and poetry offer unique insights into temporal being through their ability to create meaningful temporal experiences that transcend ordinary clock time. These aesthetic dimensions suggest that temporality involves qualitative features that cannot be captured through quantitative analysis. The investigation of temporal being ultimately returns us to the fundamental mystery of existence itself. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does this something unfold through temporal processes rather than existing in eternal stasis? As you finally surrender to sleep, releasing the last threads of temporal analysis and philosophical investigation, you enter directly into the mystery of temporal being itself, where boundaries between time and timelessness dissolve into rest.
The grandfather paradox examined. Imagine this. You build a time machine, travel back in time, and before your grandfather even meets your grandmother, you prevent their encounter. Perhaps you cause a small, seemingly insignificant accident. The consequence? Your parents are never born. And if your parents were never born,
then you, the time traveler, were never born. But if you were never born, how could you have traveled back in time to create this paradox in the first place? It's a classic causal loop, a mind-bending conundrum that challenges our understanding of cause and effect, and the very possibility of time travel. This paradox, first popularized by René Barjavel in his 1943 novel Le Voyageur Imprudent, or The Careless Traveler, highlights a fundamental tension in the concept of altering the past. If you can change the past, then the past you changed no longer exists in its original form. This leads to an inherent contradiction. You exist to make the change, but the change you make would erase your own existence. It's a scenario that seems to break the fundamental rules of logic and causality as we understand them. So, how do philosophers and scientists grapple with this seemingly insurmountable problem? One popular idea, often discussed in theoretical physics, is the Novikov self-consistency principle. Proposed by physicist Igor Novikov, this principle suggests that if time travel into the past is possible, the laws of physics would, by their very nature, prevent any action that leads to a paradox. In essence, whatever you do in the past, you simply cannot change it in a way that creates a contradiction. For instance, if your intention was to prevent your grandparents from meeting, something would inevitably go wrong with your attempt. Your equipment might malfunction, you might get disoriented and miss your target, or perhaps your actions, in a twist of fate, inadvertently cause them to meet in a way that wouldn't have happened otherwise. The universe, in this view, possesses an intrinsic mechanism to course-correct, ensuring that the past remains consistent with the present from which you originated. It's as if the timeline is robust enough to absorb or deflect any attempt at self-annihilation. Another compelling perspective involves the concept of multiple universes, or parallel timelines. In this many worlds interpretation, when you travel back and make a change, you don't actually alter your original pristine timeline. Instead, your action causes a branching off, a bifurcation into a new alternate reality. In this newly created timeline, your grandparents might indeed never meet, and consequently, you are never born within that specific branch. However, your original timeline, the one you departed from, remains entirely unaffected and intact, and you continue to exist within that altered branch, a visitor from another reality. The grandfather paradox, therefore, serves as far more than just a science fiction trope. It acts as a crucial thought experiment, a mental laboratory that pushes us to consider the logical constraints and potential structures of time itself. Is time a fixed, unchangeable river flowing in a single direction, or is it a fluid, dynamic, and possibly branching stream? The paradox forces us to explore these profound possibilities, laying essential groundwork for our deeper exploration into how we perceive, understand, and ultimately experience time. It's a tantalizing invitation to question the very foundations of our reality and the arrows that guide our existence through the unfolding moments.
Time dilation and human perception. Our journey into the philosophy of time continues with a concept rooted in the very fabric of physics, yet deeply entwined with our subjective experience: time dilation. This isn't merely a theoretical curiosity. It directly impacts how we, as conscious beings, perceive the passage of moments. At its core, time dilation is a phenomenon predicted by Albert Einstein's theories of relativity, specifically special relativity. It states that time does not pass at the same rate for everyone. Instead, the passage of time is relative to the observer's motion and the gravitational field they are in. The faster an object moves through space,
the slower time passes for that object relative to a stationary observer. Similarly, time also slows down in stronger gravitational fields. This means that if you were to travel at speeds approaching the speed of light, or spend time in a very strong gravitational field, your clock would tick slower than a clock that remained on Earth. Now, how does this relate to human perception? For us, living our everyday lives, these effects are minuscule, practically imperceptible. The speeds we experience are so far below the speed of light, and the gravitational differences we encounter on Earth are so slight, that the dilation of time is measured in nanoseconds or picoseconds, far too small for our senses to register. Our internal clocks, our biological rhythms, our very consciousness are all operating within a frame where time feels remarkably consistent. However, the idea of time dilation profoundly influences how we think about time. It shatters the Newtonian concept of absolute universal time, a single cosmic clock ticking uniformly for all. Instead, it presents time as a flexible, dynamic dimension, intimately connected to space itself, forming what we call space-time. This shift in perspective is fundamental. It means that there isn't one true present moment that everyone shares. My now might be slightly different from your now if we are moving at different speeds or are in different gravitational environments. Consider the thought experiment of identical twins. One twin stays on Earth, while the other embarks on a space journey at near light speeds. Upon the traveling twins' return, they would be younger than their Earthbound sibling. This isn't science fiction, it's a consequence of time dilation. The traveler's perception of their journey would be that it took a certain number of years, but from Earth's perspective, the journey, and thus the time elapsed for the traveler, would have been much longer. This phenomenon forces us to question the nature of our subjective experience. We feel time passing, we remember the past, experience the present, and anticipate the future. But if time itself is relative, is our perception of its flow an accurate reflection of an objective reality? Or is it a biological and psychological construct tailored to our limited terrestrial experience? Our perception of time is not a direct reading of a universal clock. It's influenced by our attention, our emotions, our memories, and our physiological states. A boring lecture can make minutes feel like hours, while an exciting adventure can make hours vanish in what feels like minutes. Time dilation, by demonstrating that time's passage can vary, highlights the gap between the physics of time and our lived experience of it. It suggests that while the universe may operate on principles of relative time, our internal sense of time is shaped by a complex interplay of physical, biological, and psychological factors. It's a reminder that our understanding of time is dual. It's both a fundamental dimension of the cosmos and a deeply personal, often subjective experience.
The block universe theory. Continuing our exploration of time, we arrive at a philosophical model that radically reshapes our understanding of its very nature: the block universe theory. This concept proposes that all moments in time, the past, the present, and the future, exist simultaneously and are equally real. Imagine time not as a flowing river, but as a vast, unchangeable block, or a landscape, where every event, from the Big Bang to the farthest reaches of the future, is already there, laid out in its entirety. In this view, what we perceive as the passage of time, our sense of moving from one moment to the next, is merely our consciousness traversing this pre-existing static block. The future isn't something that happens, it's simply another region of this block that we haven't reached yet in our conscious journey. Similarly, the past isn't gone, it's just another part of the block,
as real as the present moment. This perspective is often referred to as eternalism, in contrast to presentism, which holds that only the present moment is real, or growing block theories, which suggest the past and present are real, but the future is not yet determined. The block universe theory finds significant support in physics, particularly in Einstein's theory of relativity. Relativity shows that space and time are not separate entities, but are interwoven into a four-dimensional continuum called spacetime. Events that are simultaneous for one observer may not be simultaneous for another observer in a different frame of reference, as we touched upon with time dilation. This lack of a universal now lends credence to the idea that all moments exist concurrently within this space-time manifold, independent of any observer's perception. If there's no objective, universal present moment, then it becomes more plausible that all moments simply are. If the block universe is indeed our reality, it has profound implications for our understanding of free will, determinism, and causality. In a block universe, the future is already written, laid out just like the past. This suggests a deterministic universe, where every event, including our choices, is predetermined. If your future actions are already part of the block, then the idea of making a truly free choice becomes problematic. Your decision is simply the pre-existing state of affairs at that particular location in spacetime. This can be a difficult concept to reconcile with our lived experience. We feel like we make choices, that we influence the future, and that the past could have been different. Our consciousness experiences a sequential unfolding, a sense of becoming. The block universe theory, however, suggests that this sequential experience is an illusion, a byproduct of how our minds process the information laid out in the static block of spacetime. It's akin to a movie reel. All the frames exist simultaneously on the reel, but when we play it, we experience a narrative flow. However, it's important to note that the block universe theory doesn't necessarily mean that events are static in the sense of being unchanging. Within the block, events still unfold, causes still lead to effects, and processes still occur. It's the existence of these events that is simultaneous, not their dynamic unfolding. The relationships and causal chains are all there, part of the intricate structure of the block. Ultimately, the block universe theory offers a powerful, albeit potentially unsettling, framework for understanding time. It challenges our intuitive notions of flow and change, suggesting a reality where past, present, and future are all part of a single, eternal, and unchanging structure. It's a concept that invites deep contemplation on the nature of existence and our place within the grand tapestry of space-time.
The relativity of simultaneous events. Our exploration of time's peculiar nature continues with a concept that fundamentally challenges our intuitive understanding of now, the relativity of simultaneous events. This idea, another profound insight stemming from Einstein's theory of special relativity, reveals that whether two events happen at the same time is not an absolute truth, but rather depends on the observer's frame of reference, specifically their motion. Imagine two lightning strikes happening at different points. For an observer standing precisely midway between these two strikes, it might appear that both strikes occurred at the exact same instant. Light from both strikes would reach them at the same time. However, for another observer moving at a significant speed towards one of the strikes and away from the other, this perception of simultaneity would be shattered.
The light from the strike in their direction of travel would reach them sooner, while the light from the strike they are moving away from would reach them later. This difference in observation isn't due to faulty equipment or a misinterpretation of signals. It's a direct consequence of how motion affects the measurement of time and the speed of light. Special relativity posits that the speed of light in a vacuum is constant for all observers, regardless of their own motion. To maintain this constant speed of light across different frames of reference, something else must give: our common understanding of simultaneous events. The relativity of simultaneity means that there is no universal now that applies to everyone, everywhere. What is simultaneous for you might not be simultaneous for someone moving at a different velocity. This undermines the Newtonian concept of absolute time, a single cosmic clock ticking in unison for the entire universe. Instead, it suggests that each observer carries their own personal now, and these personal nows can differ. This has significant philosophical implications. If simultaneity is relative, then our intuitive sense of a shared present moment is, in a way, an illusion that works for us in our low-speed, earthbound lives. It implies that events that are separated in time for one observer might be simultaneous for another, and vice versa. This can lead to seemingly paradoxical situations, though they are logically consistent within the framework of relativity. Consider a long train moving at a substantial fraction of the speed of light. If lightning strikes both the front and the rear of the train simultaneously according to an observer standing on the ground beside the tracks, an observer inside the train moving towards the front strike and away from the rear strike will perceive the front strike happening before the rear strike. This is because the light from the front strike has a shorter distance to travel to reach the moving observer, while the light from the rear strike has a longer distance to cover due to the observer's motion away from it. This concept helps to solidify the idea of space-time as a unified entity. Space and time are not independent stages upon which events unfold, but rather they are interwoven. Our perception of the temporal order of events is influenced by our spatial motion through this unified spacetime. The relativity of simultaneity is a cornerstone of modern physics and a vital component in understanding the universe. It forces us to abandon our everyday intuitive notions of time and embrace a more complex, interconnected, and observer-dependent reality. It highlights that our perception of time is not a direct window onto an absolute reality, but rather a fascinating interplay between the physical laws of the universe and our own motion within it.
Temporal logic and possibility. Our exploration of time delves into the realm of logic and possibility with the concept of temporal logic. This specialized branch of logic is concerned with reasoning about propositions whose truth value can change over time. It moves beyond the static, timeless truths of classical logic to address the dynamic nature of reality, where statements can become true or false as time progresses. At its heart, temporal logic introduces temporal operators. These are special words or symbols that allow us to express relationships between events and statements across time. For instance, we might use an operator meaning "in the future," or "it will always be the case that," or "it was at some point the case that." These operators enable us to formalize statements about change, sequences of events, and the implications of past actions on future outcomes. Consider a simple proposition like "the sun is shining." In classical logic, this is either true or false.
But in temporal logic, we can say, it will be the case that the sun is shining tomorrow, or it was the case yesterday that the sun was shining. This allows for a much richer and more accurate representation of how our world actually works, where truth and falsity are often time-dependent. The study of temporal logic is particularly crucial when we consider concepts like possibility and necessity, especially in the context of events that have not yet occurred or that might have happened differently. For example, what does it mean to say something is possible in the future? Does it mean that there is a possible world, a branching timeline where that event occurs? Or does it mean that within the single unfolding timeline, there is an open pathway for that event to occur? This brings us to the relationship between temporal logic and the concept of modality, the study of necessity and possibility. Temporal logic can be used to build formal systems that describe different theories of time and modality. Some systems might assume a deterministic universe, where only one future is possible, and every event is necessary. In such a system, saying "it will be the case" is equivalent to saying "it is necessarily the case." Other temporal logical systems might embrace indeterminism, acknowledging multiple possible futures. In these systems, the future is not fixed. The truth of a statement about the future might depend on choices yet to be made or events yet to unfold. This aligns more closely with our intuitive sense of free will and contingency. Here, possibility becomes a significant operator. It is possible in the future that X will happen. This opens up discussions about counterfactuals, what would have happened if things had been different. Temporal logic provides the formal tools to precisely analyze these kinds of statements. It helps us to understand the logical structure of claims about what can happen, what must happen, and what did happen. When we discuss time travel paradoxes, for example, temporal logic can be used to model the logical consistency or inconsistency of various scenarios. If you travel back and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, temporal logic can help us formalize the contradiction that arises from such an act within a single consistent timeline. By formalizing reasoning about time, temporal logic provides a framework for clarifying complex philosophical questions. It allows us to break down arguments about causality, change, and possibility into precise logical components, making it easier to assess their validity and explore their implications for our understanding of reality itself. It's a powerful tool for dissecting the very structure of temporal reasoning.
The philosophy of temporal parts. As we continue our exploration into the nature of time, we encounter a philosophical concept that challenges our intuition about identity and persistence over time: the philosophy of temporal parts. This idea suggests that an object or a person isn't a single enduring entity throughout their existence, but rather a collection of distinct temporal stages, or temporal parts, each existing at a specific point or duration in time. Think of a classic statue. When we consider its identity, we usually think of it as a single continuous object. However, the philosophy of temporal parts proposes a different view. This statue, from its creation to its eventual destruction, is not one unchanging entity. Instead, it's a series of successive temporal slices: the statue at time t1, the statue at time t2, and so on.
Each of these temporal parts exists at its designated moment, and the continuous statue we perceive is, in a sense, the collection, or the worm, of these parts assembled across time. This concept is often referred to as perdurantism, or stage theory, in contrast to endurantism, which holds that an object is wholly present at every moment of its existence. If an object is a perdurantist entity, it extends through time in a way analogous to how it extends through space. Just as an object has different spatial parts, a top, a bottom, a left side, a right side, it also has different temporal parts, a past part, a present part, and a future part. The appeal of perdurantism lies in its ability to elegantly solve certain philosophical puzzles, particularly those related to identity and change. For example, consider a ship that is gradually repaired, with each original plank being replaced over time until none of the original material remains. Is it still the same ship? If we adhere to endurantism, we might struggle to answer this. However, from a perdurantist perspective, the ship is the continuous temporal worm that includes all these stages. The ship at time t1, made of original planks, is a different temporal part of the overall shipworm than the ship at time t2, with some replaced planks. The identity lies in the continuity of the worm itself, not in the persistence of any single temporal stage. Similarly, personal identity over time can be viewed through this lens. You at age 5, you at age 20, and you at age 60 are all distinct temporal parts of a larger, enduring you-worm. The psychological continuity and memory that we often associate with personal identity can be seen as the way our consciousness experiences the progression through these temporal parts. This perspective has profound implications for our understanding of change. If an object is made up of temporal parts, then when an object changes, it's not the same entity that is changing. Rather, it's that different temporal parts of the entity have different properties. For example, a lump of clay might be shaped into a statue. The lump of clay before shaping and the statue after shaping are different temporal parts. The property of being shapeless belongs to one part, while the property of being a statue belongs to another. However, this theory also presents challenges. It can feel counterintuitive to think of ourselves as collections of temporal slices rather than a unified being. It also raises questions about what constitutes the whole object or person if it's not wholly present at any given moment. The relationship between these temporal parts and the overarching identity they form is a complex area of philosophical debate. The philosophy of temporal parts offers a sophisticated way to think about how entities persist through time, acknowledging that change is fundamental to existence. It invites us to reconsider what it means to be the same thing or person across different moments, and whether our identity is tied to enduring substance or to a continuous temporal journey.
Time and the nature of change. Our journey through the philosophy of time brings us to a fundamental question that underlies our very experience of reality. What is the nature of change? If time is what allows for change, then understanding time is inseparable from understanding how things transform, evolve, and come into being or pass out of existence. At its most basic, change implies a difference between an object or state at one point in time and an object or state at another point in time. It's the transition from one condition to another. Think of a seed growing into a tree, or a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly.
These are clear examples of temporal change, where the entity at an earlier time is qualitatively different from the entity at a later time. But how does time enable this? Is change a fundamental property of the universe, or is it something that arises from the way we perceive time? Philosophers have debated various perspectives. Some, like the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, believed that everything is in constant flux, everything flows, and that change is the only constant. In this view, stasis is an illusion. Reality is fundamentally dynamic. Others, like Parmenides, argued for the opposite, that true reality is unchanging and eternal, and that change is merely an illusion of our senses. This perspective suggests that if something truly exists, it must have always existed and will always exist in the same state. Any perceived change is a misperception of a static, unchanging reality. Modern physics, particularly Einstein's theory of relativity, offers a different lens. As we've discussed with the block universe theory, relativity suggests that all moments in time might exist simultaneously. If this is the case, then change might not be a process of transition from one state to another, but rather the existence of different states at different locations within the static spacetime block. The transformation from seed to tree, in this view, is not a dynamic unfolding, but the existence of the seed at time t1 and the tree at time t2 as distinct but coexisting parts of the spacetime manifold. This raises profound questions about causality. If change is an illusion of perception within a static block, what drives these apparent transformations? Causality, the relationship between cause and effect, is intrinsically tied to temporal succession. A cause must precede its effect. If all moments are equally real and present, how do we account for the apparent causal links that seem to drive change? The answer, within the block universe framework, is that the causal relationships are also part of the static structure of spacetime. Our psychological experience of time is crucial here. We perceive change because our consciousness moves through time sequentially. We remember the past states and anticipate future states. Our brains are wired to detect patterns and transformations, making change a central feature of our lived reality. Is this perception of temporal succession and dynamic change a fundamental aspect of the universe, or is it a product of our limited biological perspective? The question of time and change also touches upon persistence. How does something remain the same thing while undergoing change? If a tree loses its leaves in winter and regains them in spring, is it the same tree? This is the problem of identity through change. Temporal logic and theories like perdurantism offer ways to model this, suggesting that the identity might lie in the continuity of its temporal parts, or the persistence of its underlying form through different stages. Ultimately, understanding the nature of change is deeply intertwined with our understanding of time. Whether change is a fundamental process enabled by time, or an emergent property of our perception of a static temporal landscape, it remains the most tangible manifestation of time's passage in our lives. It's through change that we witness the unfolding of events, the growth of life, and the very narrative of existence.
The eternal now concept. We now turn our attention to a perspective that offers a radical shift from our usual experience of linear time, the eternal now concept. This philosophical and spiritual idea suggests that all of time, past, present, and future, exists in a single, indivisible moment, the eternal now. In this view, our perception of time flowing from one moment to the next is an illusion, a product of our consciousness's limited perspective. The core tenet of the eternal now is that existence is not a temporal unfolding, but rather a timeless present. Everything that has ever happened, is happening, or will happen exists simultaneously in this eternal moment. This concept is found in various spiritual traditions, mystical philosophies, and some interpretations of physics, particularly those that lean towards the block universe model. From a spiritual or mystical standpoint, embracing the eternal now is often seen as a path to liberation or enlightenment. It suggests that by detaching from our temporal anxieties, worries about the past, or concerns about the future, and by fully inhabiting the present moment, we can achieve a state of profound peace and awareness. If all moments are eternally present, then the past is not lost, and the future is not yet to be created. They simply are within this boundless now. In physics, the eternal now aligns with the implications of Einstein's theory of relativity, which challenges the notion of a universal, objective present. As we've seen, relativity suggests that simultaneity is relative to the observer's frame of reference. There is no single, privileged moment that everyone agrees is now. This lack of an absolute now can be interpreted as supporting a view where all moments exist equally, without a specific temporal order or a privileged present. If we consider the eternal now, it profoundly impacts our understanding of free will and destiny. If all of time is already present, then it implies that the future, like the past, is already determined. Our actions, our choices, and all events are already part of this eternal moment. This perspective can be seen as a form of determinism, where the unfolding of events is not a matter of creation, but of realization. Our sense of agency, of making choices that shape the future, might be a consequence of our consciousness experiencing this pre-existing reality sequentially. This concept directly contrasts with our everyday experience. We feel time passing. We remember what has been and anticipate what will be. We plan for the future and learn from the past. This temporal progression is fundamental to our sense of self and our narrative of life. The eternal now suggests that this felt progression is not a reflection of objective reality, but a subjective interpretation of a timeless existence. The challenge of the eternal now lies in reconciling this timeless perspective with our temporal experience. How can we, as beings who seem to exist in time, access or even comprehend a state of timelessness? Some spiritual traditions suggest that through deep meditation, mindfulness, or mystical experience, one can gain glimpses of this eternal now, a state of being where the boundaries of time dissolve. It's a concept that invites deep introspection. If the past is not gone, and the future is not yet to come, but all exist in an eternal present, then our focus on the now becomes not just a psychological technique for peace, but a metaphysical insight into the fundamental nature of reality. The eternal now, therefore, challenges us to question the very essence of temporal experience and to consider a reality that may transcend our linear, sequential understanding.
The psychology of time perception. While physics and philosophy grapple with the objective and metaphysical nature of time, our personal experience of it is deeply rooted in psychology. The psychology of time perception explores how our minds construct, interpret, and experience the passage of time, revealing that our internal clock is far more subjective and malleable than we might assume. Our perception of time is not like a precise scientific instrument. Instead, it's a complex cognitive and emotional process influenced by a multitude of factors. One of the most striking aspects is how our attention and engagement affect our sense of duration. When we are engrossed in an activity we enjoy, what psychologists call being in a state of flow, time seems to fly by. Minutes can feel like seconds. Conversely, when we are bored, anxious, or anticipating something unpleasant, time can drag on interminably. A minute can feel like an hour. This suggests that our perception of time is not directly tied to objective clock time, but rather to the amount of information our brain processes and the novelty of our experiences. During periods of high engagement and new sensory input, our brain effectively processes more information per unit of objective time, leading to the subjective experience of time speeding up. When experiences are monotonous or predictable, less information is processed and time feels slower. Memory also plays a crucial role in how we recall and judge the passage of time. Our retrospective judgment of how much time has passed is often influenced by the number of distinct memories we have from that period. A vacation filled with novel experiences and new memories will often feel longer in retrospect than a routine week at work, even if the objective duration was the same. This is sometimes referred to as the holiday paradox. Our emotional state is another significant influencer. Fear, for example, can seem to stretch time. When we are in a dangerous situation, our brain may enter an adrenalized state, processing sensory information at a much higher rate. This heightened awareness can make a frightening event feel like it unfolds in slow motion. Conversely, positive emotions like joy can make time feel like it's accelerating. Furthermore, our internal biological clocks, such as our circadian rhythms, regulate our daily cycles of sleep and wakefulness, and these also influence our subtle perceptions of time. Age is also a factor. As we get older, time often seems to pass more quickly. This is thought to be partly because each year represents a smaller fraction of our total life experience, and also because our lives tend to become more routine, with fewer novel experiences. The way we anticipate future events also shapes our perception. Waiting for a highly anticipated event can make the intervening time feel agonizingly slow, while events we dread might seem to approach with alarming speed. This is the psychological phenomenon of time compression or time expansion. Ultimately, the psychology of time perception reveals that our experience of time is a construct of our minds, a deeply personal and often unreliable interpretation of the temporal dimension. It's a fascinating interplay of attention, memory, emotion, and biological rhythms, demonstrating that while physics may describe the objective properties of time, psychology illuminates the subjective reality of how we live within it.
The ontology of temporal relations. Our exploration into the philosophy of time now takes us to the fundamental question of what exists and how it relates to time, the ontology of temporal relations. Ontology is the study of being, and when applied to time, it asks, what is the nature of temporal existence? What kinds of things exist in time, and what are the relationships between them? This delves into the very existence of past, present, and future entities and events. As we've seen, different theories of time propose different ontologies. Presentism, for example, posits that only the present moment is real.
In this view, past events and future events simply do not exist. They are not entities that have being. The ontology of presentism is thus limited to what is happening now. This raises questions about how we can talk about, remember, or even understand past events if they don't exist. Eternalism, or the block universe theory, offers a contrasting ontology. Here, all moments in time, past, present, and future, are equally real. The ontology of eternalism includes past, present, and future entities and events. They all possess being, existing as part of the four-dimensional spacetime manifold. The past and future are merely relational descriptions, like north and south, denoting locations within this existing block. A third perspective, the growing block theory, combines aspects of both. This ontology holds that the past and the present are real, but the future is not yet determinate or existent. As time passes, new moments come into being and are added to the block of reality. So, the ontology includes all that has happened and all that is happening, but the future remains open, a realm of possibilities rather than existent entities. Beyond the existence of events, ontology also considers the nature of temporal relations themselves. Are these relations, like before, after, simultaneous, during, fundamental properties of reality, or are they constructs of our minds? If we adopt an eternalist view, then relations like before and after are simply descriptions of the spatial separation of events within the spacetime block. They are objective, fixed relationships. In presentism, however, the ontology of temporal relations becomes more complex. If only the present exists, how can we meaningfully speak of a past event being before a present event if that past event doesn't exist? This suggests that perhaps temporal relations are not about relations between existent entities, but rather about the relationships between present moments and how they connect to or are caused by states that are no longer present. The ontology of temporal relations also touches upon persistence and identity. How do objects or persons persist through time if they are not wholly present at every moment? As discussed with temporal parts, perdurantism suggests that an object is a collection of temporal stages, and its identity is the relation between these stages. Endurantism, conversely, argues that an object is wholly present at each moment it exists, maintaining its identity throughout. Ultimately, the ontology of temporal relations is about defining what counts as real in relation to time. It forces us to confront our assumptions about existence, causality, and the nature of change. Whether we believe only the present is real or that all of time exists equally, our stance on the ontology of temporal relations shapes our entire worldview and our understanding of our place within the grand temporal unfolding, or lack thereof, of the cosmos.
The experience of time in dreams. Our investigation into the diverse facets of time now shifts to a realm where our perception of it becomes particularly fluid and distorted. The experience of time in dreams. Dreams, those nocturnal narratives woven by our subconscious, often defy the logical, linear progression of time that governs our waking lives. They offer a unique laboratory for understanding how our minds can manipulate temporal experience. In the dream state, time can be radically compressed, expanded, or even become circular or non-existent. We might experience years passing in what feels like mere minutes, or conversely, a single event can be stretched out, with every detail meticulously replayed over an extended period. A dream can begin in one setting, then abruptly jump to another, with no apparent transition or logical connection, suggesting a complete disregard for sequential continuity. One of the most striking aspects of dream time is its elasticity. A common experience is that of time flying by rapidly, especially during moments of intense activity or emotional significance within the dream. Conversely, moments of fear or suspense in a dream can be drawn out, creating an intense, almost unbearable duration. This subjective stretching and compressing of time mirrors the psychological phenomena we experience in waking life, but often to a far greater extreme. Dreams can also exhibit a peculiar form of temporal looping or repetition. We might find ourselves reliving the same event or sequence multiple times, each iteration slightly different, as if the dream narrative is caught in a cycle. This can create a sense of temporal confusion, where it becomes difficult to distinguish between what has happened once and what has been replayed. Furthermore, dreams often disregard the strict causality that we expect in our waking reality. Events may occur without clear antecedents, or outcomes may appear without apparent causes. This temporal disorganization can contribute to the surreal and often baffling nature of our dream experiences. The cause and effect chain, so central to our waking understanding of time, can be broken or rearranged at will within the dreamscape. The psychological mechanisms behind these distortions are still being explored. Some theories suggest that during REM sleep, the brain activity patterns differ from those in waking states, leading to altered temporal processing. The reduction in activity in certain prefrontal cortex areas, which are crucial for logical reasoning and executive functions, might explain the breakdown of linear time and causality. Our memories also play a complex role. Dreams can draw on fragmented memories and recombine them in novel ways, further blurring temporal boundaries. Furthermore, dreams often disregard the strict causality that we expect in our waking reality. Events may occur without clear antecedents, or outcomes may appear without apparent causes. This temporal disorganization can contribute to the surreal and often baffling nature of our dream experiences. The cause and effect chain, so central to our waking understanding of time, can be broken or rearranged at will within the dreamscape. The psychological mechanisms behind these distortions are still being explored. Some theories suggest that during REM sleep, the brain activity patterns differ from those in waking states, leading to altered temporal processing. The reduction in activity in certain prefrontal cortex areas, which are crucial for logical reasoning and executive functions, might explain the breakdown of linear time and causality. Our memories also play a complex role. Dreams can draw on fragmented memories and recombine them in novel ways, further blurring temporal boundaries. Furthermore, dreams often disregard the strict causality that we expect in our waking reality. Events may occur without clear antecedents, or outcomes may appear without apparent causes. This temporal disorganization can contribute to the surreal and often baffling nature of our dream experiences. The cause and effect chain, so central to our waking understanding of time, can be broken or rearranged at will within the dreamscape. The experience of time in dreams also prompts us to question the fundamental nature of our temporal perception. If our minds can create such radically different experiences of time during sleep, how much of our waking perception is a construct, and how much is a direct reflection of objective temporal reality? Dreams suggest that our brains are highly adept at creating compelling temporal narratives, even when disconnected from external temporal anchors.
In essence, dreams serve as a powerful reminder that time as we experience it is not merely an external clock, but an internal psychological phenomenon. They showcase the mind's capacity to bend, warp, and reconfigure temporal sequences, offering a unique, albeit often disorienting, perspective on the subjective nature.
Temporal boundaries and continuity. Our exploration of time leads us to consider its structure and how events and objects maintain their existence across its expanse. Temporal boundaries and continuity. This philosophical concept examines how time is segmented, how transitions between states occur, and what it means for something to persist without interruption through temporal intervals. We intuitively understand time as having boundaries. There's the beginning of an event, a duration, and an end. For example, a movie has a start time and an end time. A lecture has a scheduled beginning and conclusion. These boundaries define discrete periods within the flow of time. However, the philosophical question arises, what exactly is happening at these boundaries, and what ensures continuity between them? Consider the problem of temporal parts again. If an object is a collection of temporal stages, what connects these stages to form a continuous entity? Is it a specific type of relation between adjacent parts, or is the continuity inherent in the nature of the object itself? For endurentists who believe an object is wholly present at every moment it exists, continuity is less of a puzzle. The object simply is there, without gaps. But for perdurentists who see objects as temporal worms, maintaining the continuity of these parts across various states and changes is a key challenge. The concept of temporal boundaries also relates to the beginning and end of existence itself. For instance, at what point does a person truly come into being? Is it conception, birth, or some later stage of development? Similarly, when does a person cease to exist? Is it when their heart stops beating, or when their brain activity ceases, or perhaps at a later point? These are not just biological or legal questions, they are deeply philosophical inquiries into temporal ontology and identity. This idea of continuity is also crucial for understanding change. If an entity changes, how does it remain the same entity? For instance, a river is constantly flowing, its water molecules being replaced, yet we perceive it as a continuous entity. The riverness seems to persist despite the constant change in its constituent parts. What is it that provides this continuity? Is it a consistent form, a causal lineage, or something else entirely? Furthermore, temporal boundaries can be conceptualized in relation to events and processes. An event can be seen as occupying a specific temporal interval, defined by its start and end. But what if an event is instantaneous? Does it still have temporal boundaries, or is it a point, a boundary in itself? The idea of instantaneous events, like a flash of lightning, can be philosophically tricky when considering temporal duration and continuity. The nature of continuity also impacts our understanding of causation. For a cause to lead to an effect, there must be some temporal connection, some unbroken chain of influence. If there are gaps in time, or if entities cease to exist and then reappear, the notion of cause and effect becomes problematic. Continuity ensures that processes can unfold in a coherent and causally linked manner. Ultimately, temporal boundaries and continuity are about how we carve up and make sense of the temporal landscape.
They force us to think about the structure of time, the nature of objects and events within it, and the principles that allow for persistence and change. Whether we view time as a smooth flow or a series of discrete moments, understanding how these boundaries and continuities are established is fundamental to comprehending the temporal dimension of reality.
The philosophy of temporal existence. Our journey through the complexities of time brings us to a foundational question that underpins all others, the philosophy of temporal existence. This area of inquiry examines the very nature of existing in time, what it means for something to have being within the temporal dimension, and the different ways existence itself can be understood in relation to past, present, and future. At its core, temporal existence is about how entities, events, and states of affairs relate to the temporal dimension. It's not just about whether something exists, but how it exists in relation to time. This leads to fundamental disagreements about the reality of different temporal periods, as we've touched upon with presentism and eternalism. For the presentist, temporal existence is synonymous with present existence. Only things that exist now have genuine being. The past having ceased to exist, and the future not yet having come into existence, are ontologically empty, or at least possess a different mode of being, perhaps as memories or possibilities rather than actual existence. This raises a crucial question. If past events don't exist, how can we talk about them? How can they have causal influence? And what is the nature of our knowledge of them? Eternalism, on the other hand, asserts that all temporal existence is equally real. Past, present, and future entities and events all possess being, existing as part of the fixed four-dimensional space-time continuum. In this view, existence is not limited to the now. An event that occurred 1,000,000 years ago exists in the same way that an event occurring right now exists. They are simply located at different temporal coordinates within the spacetime block. This perspective aligns well with much of modern physics. The growing block theory offers a compromise. Existence grows as time progresses. The past and present exist, but the future does not yet have being. Its existence is only potential, a realm of possibilities that will become actualized as time moves forward. This view tries to preserve our intuition of an open future and free will while acknowledging the reality of the past. The philosophy of temporal existence also grapples with the nature of change and persistence. If something exists through time, how does it manage to be the same thing over that duration, especially if it undergoes change? This leads to debates about endurantism, something is wholly present at every moment it exists, and perdurantism, something exists as a series of temporal parts. Both are theories about the mode of temporal existence. Consider abstract entities like numbers or mathematical truths. Do they exist temporally? Do they have a past, present, or future? Or do they exist timelessly, outside of the temporal dimension altogether? This is a debate about whether all existence is temporal. Some philosophers argue for a timeless realm of abstract objects, distinct from the temporal realm of concrete entities and events. Our own existence as conscious beings is perhaps the most potent example of temporal existence. We experience a passage of time. We have memories of the past. We act in the present, and we anticipate the future. Our very sense of self is deeply bound to our temporal existence, to our narrative of life unfolding through time.
Ultimately, the philosophy of temporal existence is an attempt to build a coherent metaphysical framework that accounts for our temporal experiences and aligns with our understanding of the universe. It asks, what is it to be in time? The answers we find to this question shape our understanding of reality, ourselves, and our place within the cosmic unfolding.
Time and the structure of reality. Our ongoing exploration of time brings us to a profound question about its fundamental role in the very architecture of existence, time and the structure of reality. This line of inquiry examines how time shapes, enables, and is in turn shaped by the fundamental organization of the universe. It asks not just what time is, but how it dictates the underlying framework upon which all of reality is built. From the earliest philosophical inquiries to modern physics, time has been seen as a foundational element. For thinkers like Isaac Newton, time was absolute, a universal, objective container in which all events unfolded. This view suggests that time is a pre-existing structure, an independent dimension that dictates the order and duration of all occurrences. In this Newtonian framework, the structure of reality is fundamentally temporal, in a linear and absolute sense. Einstein's theories of relativity, however, dramatically altered this perspective. Relativity revealed that time is not an independent container, but is inextricably linked with space, forming a four-dimensional continuum known as space-time. This means that the structure of reality is not just temporal, it is spatiotemporal. The way events are ordered, their durations, and their very existence are interwoven with spatial dimensions. This spatiotemporal structure implies that our common-sense notions of universal simultaneity and absolute time are incorrect. Instead, the structure of reality, as dictated by space-time, is relative to the observer's frame of reference. What appears as sequential in one frame might be seen as simultaneous in another, and vice versa. This suggests that the universe's structure is not a single fixed timeline, but a dynamic, interconnected network of space-time events. The block universe theory, as discussed earlier, offers a particular view of this structure. All of space-time, including all past, present, and future moments, exists simultaneously. In this model, the structure of reality is like a pre-existing, unchanging landscape. Our experience of passage is merely our consciousness moving through this landscape. The structure isn't something that unfolds, it simply is, complete and eternal. Conversely, theories that posit an open future, such as some interpretations of quantum mechanics or growing block models, suggest a reality whose structure is still being formed. In these views, the past is fixed, but the future is contingent and undetermined. The structure of reality in this sense is dynamic, actively being built as time progresses. The role of time here is generative, actively contributing to the ongoing construction of the universe's framework. Furthermore, time structure can be related to causality. The directionality of time, often referred to as the arrow of time, is deeply connected to cause and effect. The fact that causes typically precede their effects suggests a fundamental asymmetry in the structure of reality. If time were perfectly reversible, then the structure of reality might look very different, potentially allowing for effects to precede causes, leading to paradoxes.
In essence, the structure of reality is fundamentally temporal, whether that time is absolute, relative, fixed, or unfolding. How we understand time dictates our understanding of causality, persistence, change, and the very nature of existence itself. Whether time is the scaffolding upon which reality is built, or an intrinsic property of reality's dynamic unfolding, it remains a central organizing principle of the cosmos.
Eternity and the timeless mind. Our journey through the philosophy of time now leads us to contemplate a concept that lies beyond its usual boundaries: eternity and the timeless mind. While we primarily experience time as a sequence of moments, passing from past to present to future, eternity suggests a mode of existence that is entirely outside of this temporal framework. And a timeless mind, by extension, would be one that exists and perceives without being bound by the constraints of temporal succession. Eternity can be understood in a couple of key ways. One is sempiternity, which refers to endless duration, existing for all time, past and future, without beginning or end. This is an infinite extension of time, but it still implies a sequential experience. The other, and more profound concept for our discussion, is timelessness, or atemporality. This is not about existing forever, but about existing outside of time altogether. A timeless being or entity would not experience moments in succession. All of its existence would be present in a single, eternal now. This idea is often associated with divine or ultimate realities in many spiritual and philosophical traditions. A truly timeless mind would not remember the past or anticipate the future. For such a mind, all events, across what we perceive as linear time, would be simultaneously present. This aligns conceptually with the block universe theory in physics, where all of space-time exists eternally. If reality is indeed a static block, then a mind that could perceive this block in its entirety would be a timeless mind. The implications of a timeless mind are vast. If such a mind were the creator or sustainer of the universe, its actions and knowledge would not be bound by temporal sequence. For example, if God is timeless, then God's knowledge of human events, past, present, and future, would be a single, eternal act of knowing, not a process of remembering or foreseeing. This raises complex questions about free will. If a timeless being already knows all that will happen, does that predetermination negate the possibility of genuine free choice? Our own minds, as we experience them, are undeniably temporal. We have memories, we make decisions that affect the future, and we experience the unfolding of events moment by moment. Our consciousness is structured by this temporal progression. However, moments of intense focus, deep meditation, or profound aesthetic experience can sometimes give us glimpses of a state where the usual passage of time seems to fade. In these instances, we might feel a sense of timeless presence, a connection to something beyond the ticking clock. These subjective experiences hint at the possibility that our temporal perception might be a limited mode of consciousness, a specific way of processing reality that is tied to our biological and cognitive makeup. Could it be that a higher or different form of consciousness would perceive reality in a timeless manner? The concept of eternity and the timeless mind challenges our most fundamental assumptions about existence. It invites us to consider that perhaps our temporal experience is not the only or even the most fundamental way of being.
It opens the door to contemplate realities that transcend our usual understanding of duration, sequence, and change, suggesting that true existence might reside in a state that is perpetually, eternally now.
Time travel and logical consistency. We've traversed various philosophical landscapes of time, and now we arrive at one of its most captivating and perhaps paradoxical aspects: time travel and logical consistency. The very idea of traversing the temporal dimension, moving to the past or future, immediately conjures up a host of logical puzzles and paradoxes that challenge our understanding of cause, effect, and reality itself. The most famous of these is, of course, the grandfather paradox, which we examined at the outset. If you travel back and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, you erase your own existence, thus making your time travel impossible. This paradox highlights a core problem. How can actions in the past be altered without creating logical contradictions that unravel the timeline itself? To address this, physicists and philosophers have proposed various models for how time travel might be logically consistent, if indeed possible. One prominent idea is the Novikov self-consistency principle, which posits that the laws of physics would conspire to prevent paradoxes. If you attempt to alter the past in a way that creates a contradiction, some event would intervene. Your weapon jams, you get lost, or your actions inadvertently lead to the very outcome you were trying to prevent. In this model, the timeline is self-healing, ensuring that only consistent histories can occur. Another approach involves the concept of parallel universes or branching timelines, often associated with interpretations of quantum mechanics. In this many-world scenario, traveling to the past and making a change doesn't alter your original timeline. Instead, your actions cause a new alternate reality to branch off. In this new branch, your grandfather might not meet your grandmother, and you might not be born in that specific timeline. However, your original timeline remains unaffected, and you continue to exist within this newly created divergence. This neatly sidesteps the paradox by creating a consistent history within each separate branch. The logical consistency of time travel also hinges on our understanding of temporal existence and causality. If we consider the block universe theory, where all of space-time, past, present, and future, exists simultaneously and is fixed, then traveling to the past or future might be akin to moving to a different location within this static block. In this model, any actions taken would already be part of that pre-existing block, meaning the past is not altered, but rather the traveler becomes part of its pre-written history. This perspective suggests a deterministic universe, where paradoxes are avoided because the future is already set. The logical challenges extend to the very possibility of information transfer from the future to the past. If someone from the future gives you a groundbreaking scientific formula and you then publish it, who is the true originator of that knowledge? This is known as the bootstrap paradox or information paradox. The information seems to have no origin, existing in a closed causal loop. Ultimately, the question of time travel and logical consistency forces us to confront the deepest assumptions we have about cause, effect, free will, and the nature of reality itself. Whether paradoxes are insurmountable barriers or merely indicators of a more complex, nonlinear temporal structure, the exploration of these logical puzzles enriches our understanding of time's intricate relationship with possibility and existence.
It remains a fertile ground for both scientific speculation and philosophical debate.